Chapter 25:19. After the Archbishop left, Xiaya continued to read quietly. His pale eyelashes were dyed with light, and his thin lips were red under his delicate nose. It seemed that after a while, a hint of helplessness appeared on his indifferent face. The room was too quiet, and it seemed a little uncomfortable. Xiaya casually threw the book on the table, and a wave of distortion appeared in the air. The young man on the chair had already disappeared. Only beautiful light spots were left. After Wei Wei Bai happily sold the beautifying water, she carried the basket and walked back. The system suddenly said, "There's a group of people in front." Wei Wei Bai's smile did not change. "What does it have to do with me?" The system said, "No, it's the Holy Son of the Church of Light on patrol." Wei Wei Bai was not curious at all. "I'll take a detour." After all, the only connection she had with this world was Xiaya. She just had to deal with Xiaya. As for the original owner wanting to kill the Archbishop of the Church of Light, this was not her mission, so she would not pay attention to the Church of Light. Wei Wei Bai was about to disturb. A few rows of knights rushed over and blocked everyone's path. "The Holy Sun is on patrol, everyone stand by the roadside and lower your heads." Wei Wei Bai walked slowly, and was squeezed to the front by the crowd. It would be too conspicuous to leave now, so she calmly reached out and pulled down the hood on her head. After covering most of her face, she stood in the crowd obediently with her head lowered. This way, she would not be conspicuous at all. Anyway, she waited for the Holy Sun to pass by. She went to the ready-made clothing store to buy 2 men's winter clothes and shoes. If she wanted a strategy, she had to do it slowly, and these little things had to be done carefully. As Bai Weiwei thought about it, she casually smoothed out her sleeves. After a while, she heard a burst of Western music like heavenly music. Wei Wei Bai felt that so low class. Who would bring a stereo or something when they go out these days? It was too degrading. Everyone bowed their heads under the command of the guards, and put their hands together in a respectful manner. Bai Weiwei also made a gesture and sat up. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw 2 rows of guards riding on silky black horses slowly approaching. All the guards surrounded a carriage. The carriage was not like those of other nobles, which were full of luxurious gems. The car was full of golden patterns. It was an extremely powerful magic array. A slender and hazy figure sat behind the veil of the carriage. No one could see his face clearly, but his noble and unreachable pretentious aura could be felt. Everyone quieted down, not daring to make a sound. Everyone lowered their heads and silently clenched their fists in front of their chests. This was the etiquette of the followers of the Church of Light. Wei Wei Bai frowned as a strange feeling welled up in her heart. Was the person in the carriage looking at her? She was extremely sensitive to sudden gazes. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head, her eyes extremely calm. The system started nagging, "This saint is actually one of the sons of the old king. The old king of this plane has more than a dozen sons, and now the infighting is fierce." Wei Wei Bai asked, "A prince can be a saint?" The saint of the Church of Light sounded like an abbot in a temple to her. The system said, "Of course, because he is a prince, his identity is honorable enough to be a saint. Because the Church of Light is the family of the Rose Duchess, and it is an organization of public opinion created to counter the power of the royal family. Because the host was very concerned about the background of this plane. The system took the opportunity to explain to her. // Chapter 25:20. She wished she could say more. It was better to know more than less. Because of the destruction of the evil witch group, the believers of the Church of Light spread all over the continent, and their power increased greatly. Originally, the power of the Rose family and the royal family were only competing with each other. But because of the existence of the Church of Light, the power of the royal family was eroded. Now, as long as there is a branch of the Church of Light on the continent, it is the power of the Rose family. Wei Wei Bai searched her memory. She was a little surprised. The power of the Rose family was on the boundless continent of the kingdom. It was almost full of them. In other words, this kingdom basically had the power and territory of the Rose family. If the Rose family rebelled, the old king would be finished. What was more powerful was that when the old king was young, he was the kind of powerful monarch who attacked cities and seized territories to expand his territory. Even if he was old and a little muddle-headed, he wouldn't be weak to such an extent. It was really the Grand Duke of Rose who had forced the royal family to such an extent. And recently, the Rose Duke disappeared. It seemed that he fell into the land of the Holy Dragon, and there was a problem with magic. There were sequelae of the undead. Light magic, to the last stage of cultivation. Life and death would be exchanged. Basically, a mage who entered the undead state had a high chance of dying directly. So now that the Rose Duke didn't appear, the power of the royal family began to erode the power of the Rose family again. After all, the most powerful person of the Rose family, the Rose Duke, died, and the old king was awesome again. And the main power of the Church of Light was the Archbishop. He was one of the loyal lackeys of the Rose Duke. The target of the original owner's revenge was this Archbishop's subordinate, the Bishop of the Eastern region. Because the original owner's mother died in the Eastern region, all the accounts had to be counted on the Bishop of the Eastern region. This was the range of the Rose family's power. The original owner was too weak, otherwise, her target of revenge would have been the Rose Duke. To fight for power and profit, the witches became tragic victims. But this had nothing to do with her. After all, in this plane, for Wei Wei Bai, it was more important to conquer Xiaya and live a good life. As for the rest of the Rose, the king. Fight, 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 more dramatic fights. She could just eat melon seeds and watch it like a drama. Vicious, dark, bystander Bai was such a pragmatic girl. The system said, so didn't the Duchess of Rose disappear? To plunder the resources of the masses in the church, the prince was sent to be the Holy Sun. As long as the Archbishop was killed, the Holy Sun is in control of the church. Everything that the Rose Duchess did has become the royal family's. This saint, they were here to seize the Church of Light. Wei Wei Bai was stuffed with a large amount of information by the system, indicating that she understood. Then he expressed that it had nothing to do with him. My little darling Xiaya is still waiting for me to go home. Can this pretentious Holy Sun walk faster? Wei Wei Bai chatted with the system about the gossip of the mainland. Bien lowered his head and clasped his hands in front of his chest. She looked exactly the same as thousands of onlookers. There was nothing outstanding about it. Suddenly, the carriage slowly drove past. The saint behind the curtain was incomparably cold. He was like a noble statue. The golden blue-eyed man suddenly looked up coldly. There's the scent of a witch. The Holy Sun was the next successor of the old king. He was also the youngest Prince Pellegrini. The princes who were fighting in the palace now were all cannon fodder for him to climb up the ranks. Chapter 25-21. Because he was the old king's most outstanding child. Whether it was magic or strategy, he was exceptionally powerful. The old king had placed all his hopes on him. The Rose family and the Rose Duke would be his stepping stone to become the king of this continent. Pigri's cold eyes swept across the crowd. He faintly locked onto Wei Wei Bai's range. But his locking magic had not reached the peak yet. For a moment, he could not find where the witch was. Now, there was actually a witch. How bold and stupid. Pigri, who needed prestige, urgently needed a few major events to let the people know about him and support him. If he found the witch here, then it would definitely be very good for his reputation. Pigri immediately ordered coldly, "There is an evil witch here." The carriage immediately stopped. All the guards immediately prepared for battle. Unfathomable, like a prophecy, coldly came from the carriage. All the people were shocked. "There is a witch. Didn't the bishop say that all the witches were dead? There must be a fish that escaped the net. This holy son who suddenly appeared must be the protagonist who asked him to find the remaining witches. I'm so scared. I heard that witches eat human flesh." Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes at the side. She couldn't even eat pork. How could she have the ability to eat human flesh? But the situation was not good. Because near the square, all the guards surrounded this place. In addition, a thin light magic barrier appeared. It eliminated the possibility of so many people at the scene escaping. What if that pretentious holy son really caught her and burned her to death? Wei Wei Bai frowned, thinking about how to avoid it. The curtain of the carriage was opened. Prince Pigri walked out slowly from inside. He was tall, wearing a beautiful and expensive magic white robe, and holding a scepter in his hand. His long golden hair was tied up and hung down his back. His blue eyes were as deep as the sea. This appearance, righteous and beautiful, immediately won the hearts of many girls. Of course, for Wei Wei Bai, after seeing Xiaya, everyone looked like they were defective goods at $9.90. She lowered her head, crossed her hands in front of her chest, and said to the system, "Is there anything to cover the witch's mark?" A series of noises came from the system. "Let me see. These little things aren't available in the supermarket recently. It might take some time." Wei Wei Bai remained silent and slowly retreated. He tried his best to hide in the crowd. As for Pegrel, he was shocked by the commotion he had caused. He was extremely satisfied. All he had to do was find the witch. He stretched out his hand and said loudly under the sunlight, "With the holy sun of the Church of Light, no evil can hide. Vicious and dark witches cannot survive under the light of the holy sun." After that, he began to chant a magic incantation. He just so happened to have learned a large-scale light magic array. As long as the person with the witch's mark was inside, it would definitely hurt like a burning fire. On the other hand, whoever was in agony would be the witch. He did not wait for the system to find something that could cover the witch's mark. The magic of light had already descended. Wei Wei Bai felt her skin begin to burn. She looked fine, but the burning sensation made her feel like a flame was burning her. Wei Wei Bai clenched her teeth as her body trembled. This pain was a little beyond the limits of his endurance. Her face was pale. Without waiting for the reminder, the system had already taken out a life guarantee and threw it at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai suddenly did not feel any pain. But her body's reaction was still there. // to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 25-22. Her face was pale and she was sweating profusely. Life subsistence and other pain-relieving skills did not hide the body's instincts. Although she was not in pain, her body still hurt. She had all the physical reactions. Her legs were beginning to weaken. Wei Wei Bai held her breath, not daring to raise her head and not showing any expression of pain. But if someone were to lift her hood, they would be able to see her abnormally pale face. And her head full of sweat from the pain. Pegrel was on the carriage, looking down coldly. The light magic array had been activated for so long. If it was a witch, she should have shown signs of struggle. This was his first appearance in front of the public and showing a miracle. The witch had to appear. Otherwise, his reputation would be ruined. Pegrel said coldly, I didn't expect that evil dark demon to be so cunning. But under my holy light, evil will have nowhere to hide. After saying that, he waved his hand. Everyone, raise your heads. He did not believe that such top-notch light magic could not force the witch out. Wei Wei Bai's face was pale, and her fingers were shaking so much that she could not hold them. When she raised her head, her abnormality could not be hidden. Everyone raised their heads. And Wei Wei Bai, who had been lowering her head, was very conspicuous. Pegrel immediately sneered, the believer in the hood, raise your head. The order from above was like looking down at ants. Wei Wei Bai only felt that the order had just been given. A wave of targeted light magic attacked directly. She had the witch's mark on her body. As long as it was an offensive light magic, it would be harmful to her. And this offensive spell was meant to take her life. Wei Wei Bai was about to let the system send her away. Her identity was exposed for the time being, survival was more important. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, a pale and slender hand gently landed on her back. The light magic attack had just landed on Wei Wei Bai's body. After a burst of light, Wei Wei Bai was still standing properly. Even the abnormality on her body disappeared. Only a cool breeze surrounded her. This cooling protective power came from the young man who stretched out his hand. The voice of the person behind him was low and hoarse, with a hint of helplessness. Surprisingly, there was a hint of elegance in the voice. Why am I being bullied just because I haven't seen you for a while? Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. She whispered, Xiaya. The grievance in his voice sounded like he was about to cry. Hearing her cries, the hand that was placed on her thin back tightened a little. It seemed that the owner of the hand was angry. Then, those beautiful fingers slowly moved down and finally reached her waist. With a slight tug of his fingers, he pulled the aggrieved girl into his warm embrace. Xiaya, who was wearing the same poor people's coarse cloth robe with a hood, was standing behind her. The youth's scattered honey-colored hair fell under his eyes. In the gloomy shadows, his purple eyes were deep and dark. Don't be afraid, I'm here. The little witch muttered as if she didn't believe him. You were resurrected by black magic. That saint will kill you. I am a witch. I will be burned to death too. She was worried and scared in a small voice. It made his eyes even colder and more frightening. The youth was like a harmless large animal. He gently rested his chin on her weak shoulder. There was a smile in his words. It's okay. My Wei Wei is the kindest witch. Light magic won't hurt you at all. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be in disbelief. Xiaya said gently, do you feel better? You just didn't encounter any large-scale magic, so you weren't used to it in the beginning. You're okay now. Bai Wei Wei seemed to have been fooled into a daze. But I'm a witch. Xiaya whispered softly. It was as gentle as the rose fragrance of the wind. It doesn't matter if we die together. Aren't you, my lover? His lover was in his mouth, intimately beautiful. Wei Wei Bai's ears were numb. It was so itchy that the tips of her ears turned red. But she was touched. After such a long time of hypnosis and brainwashing, she finally brainwashed an amnesiac into her lover. The bright future ahead of her made her feel that all the hard work was worth it. When Xiaya glanced sideways, he saw her pale face under the hood and the cold sweat on her forehead. His cold eyes were even more terrifying. With killing intent, Xiaya slowly raised his eyes. He looked at the saint standing on the carriage. Chapter 25-23. After the light passed, the hooded girl didn't show any abnormalities. Pigri frowned, and whispers of complaints came from below. Not everyone was completely unscathed after being trapped here. even the believers of the Church of Light. But the Holy Son had just arrived and didn't have any prestige or reputation. If he didn't do a good job, he would be criticized and complained. Is there really a witch? I don't know, I didn't see anyone uncomfortable. But this magic array is really beautiful. What's the use of looking good? It's just fooling people. There's no witch. The Archbishop said that all witches were eliminated. Would the Archbishop lie to us? That's true. This Holy Son is so young. He probably doesn't know any magic at all. Could it be that he's here to fish for fame? More and more doubts came. The Holy Son who had just appeared suffered an unimaginable loss of reputation. Pigree's face suddenly darkened. Could it be that the hooded girl was actually a human? But there was indeed a witch's dark aura in her area. Everyone looked up, but there was no witch. Wait a minute, when did another hooded person appear beside that girl? Pigree's eyes flashed and saw the slender figure slowly raise his head. Under the dark hood, the purple eyes were stunning. The young man's delicate thin lips slowly curved into a cold smile. That smile was like the arrival of the death god. It was gorgeous to the extreme and made people feel fear. Pigree's pupils shrank, and his heart trembled. Purple eyes, there was only one person in this empire who had such beautiful purple eyes. It was the Duke of Rose. Wasn't he dead? How was he still alive? Just as he was about to retreat, he found that his body was bound by some unknown force. Before he could react, he felt the sharp pain of thousands of needles. They pierced through his bones. A strange light film twisted in the air. Only the Holy Son could see it. He wanted to call for help, but he found that his voice was blocked by the light film. He wanted to escape, but he found that the magic he was so proud of had disappeared. He had always been proud, even if he had heard of the terror of the Duke of Rose. Even his father, the Emperor, had a flash of fear in his eyes at the mention of the Rose Duke. But he had always been disdainful. He felt that he was blessed by the heavens. He was fully deserving of being the future master of this empire. The speed at which he learned magic was worthy of being called a genius. This was not the first time he had met the Rose Duchess. But in the past, they were always at banquets, and he was the high and mighty prince. Even when he met the Rose Duchess, he was shocked by her beauty. He looked down on him even more. He felt that his reputation came more from his stunning looks. But after interacting with him today, he realized that he didn't even have the slightest strength to resist. Pigree thought of the fear in his father's eyes. Fear began to appear in his eyes. Because there was a problem with his breathing, the feeling of suffocation started to make him experience the feeling of death. In fact, he couldn't even struggle. The magic gap between him and the Rose Duchess was so big that it made people despair. The Saint's sorry state was finally discovered. His face was deathly pale, and he was sweating profusely. His hands and feet were trembling, and a dark aura was emanating from his body. It was a death aura similar to that of witches. Finally, someone in the crowd realized that something was wrong. Look at the Saint's body. Is there a black aura? Chapter 25-24. Didn't you say that this magic array can find witches? Could it be? Don't talk nonsense. Isn't the Holy Son a man? Witches are full of tricks. Drugs can do many things that can't be done. Could the Holy Son have been contaminated by witches? These words were more terrifying than the suffocating pain just now. If this continued, Pigree's reputation would be ruined. He would not be able to have a foothold in the Church of Light. He would be regarded as an abandoned son by the old king. His bright future was ruined because of the Rose Duchess. But he couldn't understand why the Rose Duke would suddenly attack him. The relationship between the royal family and the Rose family was still peaceful on the surface. Even if the two sides hated each other to death, they wouldn't suddenly fall out. Pigri didn't have time to think. He suddenly felt that he could move and immediately rolled and crawled into the carriage. Go quickly. His voice trembled in fear, as if he was being chased by some demon. The carriage immediately moved. And the light magic array was also broken. It was like an unusual farce that ended without a cause. The scene that His Royal Highness had painstakingly set up to reap the reputation. But it was completely destroyed. The Holy Sun wanted to snatch the Archbishop's authority. It was impossible in a short time. It would take a lot of effort to repair the reputation. Pigri racked his brains, but he still didn't know why the Rose Duke suddenly attacked him. Could it be that he couldn't wait to rebel? When Pigri's carriage passed by the Rose Duke's place, his terrified eyes looked through the gauze curtain and saw the gorgeous youth that made people terrified. The youth was lowering his head and saying something gently to the girl in front of him. He didn't look like a killing god just now. Instead, he was so gentle that he thought he had mistaken him for someone else. After all, everyone knew how cold the Rose Duke was to people. He even wore gloves when others wanted to shake his hand. He was simply rude and arrogant to the extreme. But the youth who had always been cold and cruel had his eyes lowered and his thin lips gently curled up. That smile was like the warm sun. His hands were hugging the waist of the petite figure in front of him. Pigri couldn't help but look at the girl he suspected of being a witch. Under the big hood, he only had time to see her side profile. The side of her face was clean and fair, and her skin was as beautiful as an illusion. Even if it was only for a second. It was enough to move one's heart. Peggy could not help but poke his head out to take a look. However, he found that the Rose Duchess had already raised her eyes with a faint smile. The killing intent in her eyes was still clear. Peggy was terrified. He gripped his sleeves tightly and bit out a name as if he was about to bleed. Shea. West. Hatred and fear. Just like the old king. He didn't know why the Rose Duchess attacked him. But it was very likely that it had something to do with that girl. Countless vicious schemes flashed through Pigri's mind. Then, he slowly sat up, only to find that his body was still in so much pain that he could barely sit still. And he found that his magic seemed to have been sucked away. Peggy's expression turned even more unsightly. The crowd began to disperse. This farce caused the saint's reputation to hit rock bottom. Wei Wei Bai's expression also improved. She looked up at the youth behind her. Shea, I'm much better. The cold smile on Xiaoya's face turned gentle. I said, are you okay? Go home. He didn't tell her how dangerous the scene just now was. If he hadn't suddenly wanted to see her, she might have died in the light magic attack just now. Seeing the little witch's clueless face, he secretly sighed in relief. Chapter 25-25. She ran around everywhere, not knowing how sensitive her identity was. The witches were almost wiped out. The Church of Light was trying to win over the people. They used exaggerated propaganda to say that all the witches had been wiped out. In fact, there were still some that escaped. So the church was still secretly searching for the remaining witches. And the little witch might be caught by the church and killed. Thinking of this, Xiaya couldn't help but tighten his grip on her waist. It was really too dangerous. To her, this world was full of malice. And this thick malice was brought about by his policies. Xiaya's eyes darkened as he suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. It seemed that he had to think of a way to remove the witch mark on her. Or, to pardon the remaining witches. No more hunting for the witches. Xiaya turned over some plans in his mind. He noticed Wei Wei Bai's puzzled eyes, but he didn't reveal any clues. Then he held her hand with his fingers and said in a gentle voice, "Let's go home." Without her at home. He felt that he wasn't used to it. Wei Wei Bai nodded and suddenly thought of something. She smiled and said, "Xiaya, let's go buy clothes." Xiaya had never bought clothes before. His clothes were all designed by his personal tailor. Whatever was popular in the capital, the tailor team would design it immediately. In any case, he had never worried about food, clothing, shelter and transportation in his life. But for the little witch, taking her to buy clothes, it seemed to be a particularly grand matter. She counted the iron coins with a serious and cute face. "The clothes at home are old and some don't fit. Did you grow taller again?" When Xiaya heard that the clothes didn't fit, his eyebrows couldn't help but twitch. Not fitting, wasn't it because she mistook him for someone else? Xiaya stood quietly and didn't respond to this topic. He even felt that it was best to throw away all the unsuitable clothes at home. And those books, those things that were full of traces of that man. Little by little, it would be better if they disappeared. Just as this thought came to him, he frowned slightly. When did he start to have this kind of problem? Wasn't it just for fun? Wei Wei Bai took out a set of good-looking civilian clothes, turned around and said to Xiaya, "Try it on, Xiaya." The crisp exchange brought Xiaya's thoughts back. He looked at her quietly. His eyes were deep, and there was even a hint of hesitation in them. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were clear as she smiled and said, "You don't like it? Then I'll choose another one." Xiaya was silent for a while before slowly shaking his head. "No, it's very beautiful." After all, someone else had chosen the clothes for him. This was the first time. Then he stretched out his fingers and took the clothes. His fingertips brushed against hers. It was warm and gentle. He paused for a moment, as if something was strange. All the strange thoughts began to surface because of a doubt. The Duke had always been inexperienced in such matters. At this moment, his performance was simply embarrassing. He grabbed his clothes tightly and casually draped them over his body. Because he had chosen a winter coat. Therefore, he could tell whether it was suitable by simply draping it over his shoulder. The young man's body was unusually good-looking and slender, but not overly muscular. Perhaps it was because of his aristocratic lifestyle, but his complexion was exceptionally fair and beautiful. But she did not have the overly fragile beauty that the aristocrats worshipped. Instead, she had a kind of cold handsomeness. Even if he was draped in commoner's clothes, it did not detract from his noble beauty. Xiaya stretched out his fingers and unhurriedly tugged at the collar of the coat. The laces were not tied. He just casually draped it over his shoulders. Chapter 25-26. His wrist bones were delicate and strong, and the veins on the back of his clean hands were faintly visible. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up, overflowing with love and admiration. She couldn't help but hold her face with both hands, blushing. Very suitable. Xiaya was actually a little embarrassed. After all, they were in a shop. People were coming and going. The customers and the boss were all staring at him. He hated this kind of gaze. But when Wei Wei Bai looked at him with admiration, the irritation in his heart was suddenly replaced by a strange kind of joy. Xiaya coughed softly. "Then buy it." Wei Wei Bai immediately walked over and reached out to take off his clothes. The girl's petite body was almost buried in his arms to take the clothes. Xiaya's body stiffened a little, and his breath was filled with her scent. It was too sweet. He even wanted to take a bite of it. This inexplicable feeling of joy seemed to be contagious, and it lasted for a long time. He saw a pile of clothes and ladies' clothes. There were rows and rows of cheap but fashionable dresses hanging on the walls. For the Duke, these dresses were too shabby and trashy. But he couldn't just go back and ask his tailor to make clothes for the little witch. If he did that, he would definitely be exposed. But the little witch was so cute, even if she wore a shabby robe, she still looked good. While thinking, Xiaya did something a man shouldn't do. With a sharp eye, he took out the best cut. The dress was elegant, with a rich red hemline and lace cuffs. It was the most popular design in the capital recently. Although the material was really not good, the design was okay. And the size was just right. Xiaya held the dress and looked at Wei Wei Bai with deep eyes. He saw the little witch haggling. Then he slowly walked over with the dress. After buying the clothes, the Duke was in a very good mood as he endured the little witch's nagging. After buying the dress, you can only buy winter clothes. There's nothing to change. She pursed her lips in dissatisfaction and complained from time to time. The Duke's eyes were deep and gentle. It's fine. Don't we still have some old clothes? Wei Wei Bai unhappily muttered, I want Xiaya to wear new clothes. When Xiaya heard this, his heart felt as if it was soaked in honey water, mixed with a bit of sourness. These were all for other men to hear. But it's fine. That man is dead. He's definitely dead. When he thought of this, his mind relaxed. He was even more unable to resist the surging emotions in his heart. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 60. Wei Wei Bai, yay, a small stream flows a long stream. I've successfully gained a good impression from buying clothes. After returning home, Wei Wei Bai went to cook. Xiaya had gradually recovered his taste buds. As for Wei Wei Bai's food, he wondered if all the poor people cooked like this. He couldn't help but feel that the taste was beyond his expectations. Of course, a man who had fallen in love had no IQ. Therefore, even if what he ate was poison, he would gladly endure it. The little witch ran to the kitchen. The window opened gently, and the Archbishop appeared, bowing respectfully. He was just about to greet the Duke. A book was smashed into his face. Xiaya's voice was extremely soft, but terrifyingly cold. Silence. The Archbishop hurriedly held the book in pain, and then took out a stack of information from his arms. Then, he didn't dare to make a sound. He took his leave. Xiaya held the stack of information, his eyes darkening. This was the information of the man that the little witch liked. The man she liked, what was he like? Why was she so sure that he was her lover? Suddenly, he looked at the stack of information that was put into the bag and wanted to destroy it. Xiaya. Wei Wei Bai's voice suddenly sounded. Xiaya was shocked, and with a flip of his hand, he threw the information into the magic space. He looked at his empty fingers and secretly sighed. Then, he turned around expressionlessly. Seeing Wei Wei Bai, he asked with a smile, what do you want to eat tonight? Xiaya stared at her quietly. The rays of the setting sun projected on his body, elongating his slender shadow. The youth's quiet beauty was rich to the point of being gorgeous, like a god walking out of a thick and heavy oil painting. He suddenly smiled, a gentle smile, diluting the strange beauty of his body. I'll eat whatever Wei Wei eats. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were full of smiles, as if he was the only one in her eyes. The pure girl was like a gift that came out of nowhere, making the Duke, who had no feelings for her, feel an irrepressible impulse. Anyway, that man is dead. Then, so what if he replaces him? Anyway, it's fine as long as the little witch doesn't know, right? Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 65. Chapter 25-27. Wei Wei Bai, this relationship is rising too quickly, it doesn't match the feeling of a steady stream, but it should be because she is too successful as a nanny. The system kept feeling that something was wrong. It seemed that there was something wrong with a plane where the favorability rose too quickly. He focused on observing the emotions of Yishuan dog. The information of this plane was incomplete. He was a little unable to control the situation. But seeing that the host and the male lead were both happy, it seemed that there was nothing wrong. The system was worried while installing the Rubik's Cube. 100 Rubik's Cube had a day and a half of life value. He had already accumulated a small amount of life value by doing handicrafts. He suddenly felt that he was rich again, he. After dinner, Wei Bai carefully removed the threads on the clothes. Xiaya took the dress and put it in the wardrobe. She said that she would wear it in the future. Xiaya knew that she couldn't bear to wear it. After all, selling the beauty water would make a little profit, plus living expenses. Buying a new dress was a big expense for the little witch. But she would rather not buy it for herself, but take all the money to buy two for him. He had never felt such a simple and beautiful duke. He felt that although his castle was gorgeous, it was actually very cold. The servants were very quiet. They were afraid of disturbing him. Everything was prepared under the butler's attention. Year after year, there was no change. He was used to those days, so he didn't feel much. But, Xiaya quietly raised his thick eyelashes. Under the dazzling candlelight, his purple eyes were clear and bright. The reflection in his eyes was the little witch who was sitting under the candlelight, bending her body and trimming the threads with small scissors in her fingers. The little witch's beautiful side face was even more hazy and beautiful in the light. That soft white jade-like cheek was like a little angel with small wings in a painting, naive and ignorant of the dangers of the world. Her lips were bright red like rose petals. Under the light, there was a moist feeling of a thin layer of water vapor. Wei Bai finished cutting the lines and checked the clothes. Commoners' clothes were cheap and trendy. It was just that the quality was a little bad. She shook her clothes and was about to put them away when her wrist was suddenly grabbed. Wei Bai was taken aback. Her whole body was pulled over by this force and she sat on Xiaoya's lap. The young man's eyes were filled with suppressed heat, but he didn't do anything. Instead, he hugged her. Then, with an indifferent expression, he stretched out his hand and took the clothes. Then, he folded it in a somewhat awkward manner. Was he going to hug her and fold her clothes? Wei Bai sat in his arms obediently and did not struggle. He just felt that the young man's temperature was a little hot. Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. A boy of this age. Ha ha ha. However, it could be seen that he was still too inexperienced. When he hugged her, he was so nervous that he didn't know what to do. She could only fold the clothes. He folded the clothes and gently placed them on Wei Bai's lap. He rubbed her ear and said in a hoarse voice, "Put it in the closet later. I'll wear it tomorrow." Wei Bai's ears immediately itched. His breathing was too close, just like a feather rubbing against her ear. Xiaya looked down and saw that her white skin was dyed red. He pursed his lips in satisfaction and smiled. The castle was cold and cheerless. The old house here was dark and depressing. Only there was one more person. The environment had become lively and comfortable. Or he could find an opportunity to trick her into returning to the castle. Such a cold and cheerless castle could also become so warm and cheerful. Chapter 25-28. Various schemes of deception flashed through Xiaoya's big bad wolf mind. Wei Bai, the little cutie, was also thinking about how to create a surprise in the long run. Let the favorability level rise to another level. The atmosphere was unusually warm and beautiful. Xiaya enjoyed this warm feeling, his fingers gently touching Wei Bai's cuff. The cloth was too coarse. Maybe I should form a team of female tailors. They specialized in making women's clothes. In the aristocratic circle, female tailors were the most common and the most professional. After all, those women who had nothing to do and held banquets every day. Other than competing for beauty, there was nothing else they could do. Wei Wei Bai sat on his lap in a daze, not daring to move, letting him touch her cuff. Xiaya stared at her and suddenly asked softly, "Did you buy clothes for me like this before?" Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. It was her specialty again. She was good at making up stories. Her face immediately became gentle. "No, I almost didn't have the chance to buy clothes for you, because you had a tailor." Indeed, aristocrats were tailors. No matter how small the aristocrat was, they all had tailors. Xiaya asked faintly, "Then the clothes in the wardrobe?" Wei Wei Bai sighed and said, "That's because after you were with me, your road to aristocracy was cut off, so I had no choice but to buy them. They were all relatively cheap clothes. You weren't used to wearing them at first." "Not used to wearing them." That's right, aristocrats were used to being spoiled. Even if he often went out to temper himself, he was not interested in coarse cloth clothes. But if he really wore them, these coarse clothes would not cause him any discomfort. He carelessly touched the buttons of her cuff with his fingertips. Then, "I lost my memory. Did my personality change?" Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and snorted. "You just realized that Xiaya has become a lot colder, but it's all because of the after effects of the magic medicine. After all, you forgot about me." The little girl complained delicately. She was not necessarily angry. However, there was a hint of sadness in his heart. Xiaya's fingertips stiffened for a moment before he changed the topic. "Then, what's the difference between me and before?" Wei Wei Bai said, "He's become cold." Xiaya's voice was extremely low. "How enthusiastic was I in the past?" Wei Wei Bai tilted her head and thought for a moment. Suddenly, she turned sideways and hugged his neck with both hands. The young man's body stiffened. The little witch's eyes sparkled. "In the past, when you held me in your arms, you didn't just fold clothes." Her words had a double meaning. Xiaya understood, and a strong killing intent flashed in his eyes. But soon, his eyelashes trembled, covering the thick purple murderous intent in his eyes. "Oh, I was a little too cold." As soon as she finished speaking, he grabbed her slender wrist with his fingers on her sleeve. His other hand pressed down on her face and pulled her into his embrace. It was filled with a domineering and vicious sense of attack. Wei Wei Bai felt like she was going to be crushed by Xiaya's strength. The beautiful young man lowered his head and looked at the beautiful girl in his arms. "It's okay. I'll be very friendly to you in the future." Wei Wei Bai blinked. She felt that there was something wrong with this guy's reaction. Jealous? Wait, why was he jealous? Was he the king of jealousy? Was he the king of jealousy? Before he could figure it out, his fingers pinched her chin, and the young man lowered his head. Crossover system, Adonis, come here, /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download crossover system, Adonis, come here, crossover system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 25-29. Her breathing disappeared. Finally, he left. Wei Wei Bai came back to her senses, her eyes wide open. Xiaya's eyes were dangerous and seductive. He asked in a low voice, "What's the difference between me and before?" "I'll change them one by one." Wei Wei Bai shook her head quickly and desperately. It's the same, even you have become more beautiful." Everyone likes to hear flattery, there's no harm in saying more. "Xiaya, become more beautiful." What's the difference? Is it that his appearance is different from the previous man? Wei Wei Bai was about to continue racking her brains to say more nice things. Then she heard, ding. The little witch and the little baron had a deep affection for each other in those years. Wei Wei Bai, oh, the little tortoise is here again. It's late, but it's still here. Why is it here again? Without waiting for Wei Wei Bai to cover her ears, she wished she could be an ostrich. The seductive and sexy voice of the side quest sounded again. The witch is evil, vicious, and terrifying. But the kind and handsome little baron was injured by a wild boar while hunting. This side quest was a bit long-winded. It even came with a story. When he woke up again, he found that he had been picked up by the little witch and brought home. The little witch is kind and cute, thrifty, and housekeeping. The two of them fell in love. Wei Wei Bai, she always felt that the kind, cute, thrifty and housekeeping little witch was referring to her. But the two of them have very different identities. To save the little witch, the little baron died under the pursuit of the Church of Light. To save the little baron, the little witch made a resurrection potion. She finally succeeded, resurrecting someone else. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. Why did the prelude of this side quest grow into a foot-binding cloth? The side quest was getting better and better at stealing the limelight and attention. Ding, substitute side quest activated. Identity of the little baron, identity of the little witch, all past scenes redone. The person you love is already dead. The person you resurrect is your enemy. Host, please complete the substitute horizontal bar mission. Punishment for failure, disfigurement of the soul. As soon as the word disfigurement was mentioned, Wei Wei Bai's temples started to throb. Then, he noticed that his soul was disfigured. So she asked what it meant. The non-existent system immediately explained, once a soul is disfigured, no matter how you reincarnate or how you transmigrate, as long as a soul enters a body, the body will be disfigured. Wei Wei Bai, this was worse than killing her. She would rather die than be disfigured. She looked up, and sure enough, there was a substitute bar above her head. It was the kind of health bar that was used in games. But this bar showed zero progress. She was actually still a little confused as to what this side mission required. A substitute. Little Baron. The one he loved was already dead. The resurrected one was an enemy. In this day and age, it was almost impossible to use one's brain to do a side quest. The system finally saw Xiaoya's information appear in the data bar. The Duke of Rose. And he didn't lose his memory. He was a drama queen from beginning to end. System, now it said that he would be killed by the host, right? The system still said it. Its love for the host was as high as the sky and deep as the earth. It was not afraid of death. Wei Wei Bai's mind was filled with extra information. After reading it, she was silent for a long time. The so-called magic potion was completely useless. Because Xiaoya was originally alive. He became a skeleton only because he was in the state of a necromancer at that time. Quick. Chapter 25-30. And in addition to the Rose Duke's information, there was also the information of a strange man. It was that little baron, blonde hair and purple eyes, looking like a teenager. He was unusually handsome, but of course, he couldn't compare to Xiaoya's beauty. But it could be seen that he was somewhat similar to Xiaoya. To create a mission, even the excuse of her randomly making up a strategy. It was all made real. Even a person could be made out of thin air. Although that person was a dead person, the amount of information that was modified was unusually large. To make the substitute story seem more realistic and logical. The little baron was also called Xiaoya. In this era, there were many people with the same name. Moreover, he was a distant relative of the West Rose family. This also explained why the little baron's appearance was somewhat similar to the Rose Duke's. Even the rare purple eyes were the same. The little bitch of the side mission was to make her substitute story come true. Who had an affair with the little baron? Damn you, even the side mission is made-up nonsense these days. Can't you happily make the strategy? Wei Wei Bai was a little sluggish because of the side mission. Her fingers grabbed Xiaoya's collar, her face leaning on his chest, her face a little pale. She seemed to have thought of some bad memories. Xiaoya's eyes turned cold. Was she thinking about the dead man? But this topic was brought up by him. It was natural for the little witch to think about it. Although he thought so, Xiaoya's fingers that were pinching her waist couldn't help but tighten a little. Wei Wei Bai immediately woke up, the paleness on her face was unusually conspicuous. But she immediately raised a smile. You were very good before. For some reason, this sentence seemed unusually heavy and sweet. Xiaoya's expression didn't change. His eyes deepened a little, and he moved his lips. In the end, he didn't say anything. And the substitute bar moved forward half a point. Only half a point for a mission of 100 points. By Wei Wei, this task, I don't have a clue. Is the side mission also disabled? It doesn't even have an explanation. Thinking so, she heard the side mission ring. Ding, the substitute mission is forcibly activated. Within 24 hours, please recognize that the person you love is the little baron and expose the truth of the male lead deceiving you. Failed, the plane's face is disfigured. Wei Wei Bai, if her face was disfigured again, she would rebel. Little bitch, disfigured 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 la 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 la, Wei Wei Bai, Xiaoya saw that the girl's face had become even paler. Her eyes were sorrowful, and she grabbed his collar with unusual strength. The Duke couldn't help but lower his head slightly. His honey-colored curly hair fell under his eyes, creating a thick shadow. His thin lips curled up slightly, revealing a comforting smile. What is it, Wei Wei? Wei Wei Bai's fingertips trembled and she forced a smile. I was just thinking about when you died. Xiaoya indifferently lowered his eyes. Am I not fine now? But how did you find me? She brought him back from the cemetery. How could he be so sure that he was that lover? Wei Wei Bai seemed to have experienced a nightmare. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat, but her eyes were very bright. It was the result of a divination. I couldn't find you, but the divination told me that you were in the cemetery. Xiaoya's eyes were deep. Did you do the divination yourself? Wei Wei Bai immediately nodded and looked up at him, her eyes full of smiles that longed for praise. Yes, I'm good, right? Xiaoya looked at her silently for a while before nodding. Yes, you're good. Finally, she could explain why she was so sure that he was her lover. Because her divination was wrong. With the little witch's clumsy magic, it would be strange if she could succeed in the divination. Wei Wei Bai obediently leaned in his arms, almost curling up into a ball. She muttered silently, although your personality has changed a little, and you've become more good-looking, unlike before, it should be the after-effects of the magic medicine. So even if his personality had changed greatly, his appearance had also changed. She didn't suspect that it was because of the serious after-effects of the witch's magic medicine. Xiaoya was very sharp and heard her words clearly. He lowered his eyes incomparably cold. Then he reached out and touched her hair, feeling the beauty of her soft hair passing through his fingertips. I was so good before, I will be better now. So that man, let him completely disappear. Right, Wei Wei. Chapter 25-31. Wei Wei Bai fooled Xiaoya, her mind full of the troubles of the side quest. this substitute quest. To put it bluntly, the side quest was to make it real. In other words, she had to love the little baron, and the Duke was a substitute. She had to recognize this clearly, otherwise, the side quest would definitely fail. And within 24 hours, she had to expose the scam of Xiaoya's substitute. He really had a bellyful of bitter water flowing backwards. The lover story she casually made up had now become a mountain of problems. It would crush her without explanation. Once this was exposed, don't talk about a long term. There was basically no chance of a strategy in the future. After all, she couldn't slap her own face and say that she loved the little baron. In the blink of an eye, she had a favorable impression of the big liar Duke. How could this be convincing without a transition? Wei Wei Bai secretly glanced at Xiaya, who was sitting by the bed. The beautiful young man lowered his head, holding a book and reading a story unhurriedly. He didn't seem to notice her peeping. Because his voice was low and gentle, it was unusually pleasant and gorgeous. Wei Wei Bai listened and finally fell asleep. Xiaya was still reading the book unhurriedly. Until the sound of her even breathing rang out. He put down the book, stretched out his pale and slender fingers, pulled the blanket, and covered her tightly. The little witch was sleeping peacefully, her porcelain white face soft and soft. The young man stared at her for a while, then slowly lowered his head and kissed her cheek. Feeling the warmth of her face for a while. He got up, reached out to adjust his messy collar, and elegantly turned to leave. The commoner's old clothes were too short for him. His pants were also too short, causing his white ankles to be exposed. Xiaya didn't care, but walked to the living room. With a wave of his hand. The information of the Archbishop's investigation was spread out, and page by page flew out of the space crack. The young man stood in the middle of the living room. The candlelight was strong, and the room was full of light. A portrait in the information was also spread out. A man, no, still a young man. About the same age as the little witch. Purple eyes, blonde hair, a delicate face, a bright smile. He was actually a distant relative of Wester. His face was somewhat similar to him. This also explained why the little witch believed in the effects of divination so much. Coupled with the after effects of the magic potion and her urgent need to revive her lover. Various coincidences had led to her mistaking him for someone else. Shea reached out and touched the pages one by one. He was a baron, a low-level noble. His family was not rich, but it was enough to maintain the image of a low-level noble. Because he fell in love with a witch, he was held accountable by the Wester family. In addition, the Church of Light had completely annihilated the witches. Thus, this baron became an example to the others. He was regarded as a traitor who had colluded with the witches, and was immediately hunted down and executed by the family guards. The death of a small baron from a side branch was a very small matter to the Rose family. Even Xiaya had no impression of it. His eyes were cold, and his finger gently fell on one of the pages. The little witch's information was on it. She was the daughter of a witch and had no criminal record, but she tried to attack the bishop of the eastern region of the Church of Light. Of course it failed. He didn't know how she managed to escape, but she didn't get caught and executed. And the time she attacked the bishop was after the death of her mother and the young baron. It was as if he had no one to rely on and was planning to commit suicide. And the protagonist of the eastern region was the murderer of her mother. He was also the leader who led the guards to hunt down the baron. He had some impression of the protagonist of the eastern region. Chapter 25-32. He was an important confidant of the Archbishop, so he would be instructed to do many things. Xiaya pointed at the little witch's page of information. He stared at it silently for a long time before gently lowering his eyelids. There was a soft helplessness in his deep purple eyes. The Church of Light was his. So he was actually the murderer who killed her mother and her lover. But the little witch didn't think so much and didn't even know the relationship between the Rose Duke and the church. So she never talked about the deeds of the Rose family. In this room, there was no trace of information collected for revenge. Even the church's information, except for the light magic books that the Baron brought, there was no trace of it. It could be seen that when the little witch took revenge, she wasn't prepared at all and attacked impulsively. Later, she found the resurrection magic potion. It was the legendary medicine for the witch's servant. She brought him back by a wrong divination and fed him the precious magic potion. That was why this series of mistaken identities happened. The resurrection magic potion of the witch's servant, but there was no trace of a servant's restriction. If any witch wasted such a precious magic potion, she would definitely be laughed to death. But the little witch still didn't put any restrictions, as if she knew that the person she resurrected was not a servant, but a lover. All the doubts were solved. Suddenly, a golden light spot appeared on Xiaoya's fingertips. The light spot appeared on the paper floating in the air. The information was eroded bit by bit. In the end, it turned into countless light spots, and all the information shattered in the air. It turned into golden powder and was blown away by the wind. The Baron's bones were taken back. Even if he committed a crime, he was still a distant branch of the Rose family. So after his death, the body was taken back and placed in the Rose family cemetery on the lower floor. The little witch thought that he was in the mass grave and didn't realize that she had found the wrong place. That's right, people who were not nobles didn't have the concept of noble cemetery and private cemetery. Most people died because of poverty or crime. They would be thrown into the mass grave. And the witch was obviously the kind of person who was thrown into the mass grave. That's why the little witch went to the mass grave. Seeing that all the information disappeared, Xiaya slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Only now did he realize how stiff his muscles had been. That young man's personality was the complete opposite of his. Fortunately, the little witch was able to walk the same path to the end. They were clearly different, but she could still recognize the wrong person until now. Perhaps, she didn't dare to admit that she had mistaken him for someone else. Xiaya quietly stood in place, his silent appearance giving off an extremely cold oppressive feeling. The side of his face was so exquisite that it was flawless. It was like the work of God. He remained silent for a while with an expressionless face before he turned around and walked into the room. The single bed was still so narrow, and the little witch fell asleep with the quilt in her arms. There were a few traces of red marks on her cute sleeping face, which added a bit of charm. Fortunately, she was a witch who could only hide in a dark corner. Otherwise, she would be so beautiful. If he was a child of a noble. At this moment, her beauty had spread far and wide. After all, those so-called #1 beauties in the capital weren't even fit to carry her shoes. Xiaya unhurriedly took off his shoes and squeezed her with great effort, pulling her into his embrace. Her body was too petite and fragile. Even when she was pressed against his chest, he didn't feel any weight at all. Xiaya quietly hugged the warm girl. He lowered his eyes and felt sleepy. Chapter 25-33. Without the slightest bit of guilt for occupying a magpie's nest, he was cold-blooded all the way. Deep in the center of the empire's political maelstrom, he forced the royal family to retreat. In addition to his calm and resourceful mind, he also had an extremely cruel and cold heart. Guilt was worthless to him. Xiaya buried his face in her thick and fragrant hair and finally closed his eyes. During this time, he experienced a rare peace by her side. Even when sleeping, he used to be half asleep and alert. But now, hugging her was like hugging the safest and softest cloud in the world. With a touch, he would fall into a deep and sweet sleep. Xiaya couldn't help but curve his lips, revealing a gentle smile. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 70. This favorability increased. The system silently ate the discounted dried fish. Thinking of the side mission, it felt that the increase in favorability was all due to the side mission. The sinister side mission, disfigured. The system silently took out a fly swatter, flattened the side mission notification and threw it back. Damn, even the side mission is to show his presence. He already had enough screen time, should he add a line to the side mission? Then the system finished eating the premonition and continued to pack the Rubik's Cube. The Otaku Craftsman system was still a peaceful day. Wei Bai felt that she needed to change her bed. She slept until her bones fell apart. The bed was just that small. She found it too cramped to sleep alone. That guy Xiaya couldn't even straighten his legs. He actually cast a sleeping spell on her while she was sleeping, and then forced himself onto the bed. It was just that small. Don't you blush when you see it? You still have the nerve to force yourself onto the bed. When she woke up in the morning, her whole body was squeezed into the wall by Xiaya, and the youth had no sense of shame, his hands and feet tightly bound her. She was like stuffing in a bun, suffocating to death. Wei Bai touched her red nose while bitterly cooking. Her nose was red because she was squeezed out by the wall. Because the bed was too small, she was afraid that she would fall off the bed. Therefore, one side of the bed was placed next to the wall. This was also the reason why it was able to squeeze two people and flatten them without them falling out. Because she was distracted, she didn't pay much attention to the way she cooked. When the broth turned into black, purple, blue, it felt like it had all sorts of colors. Wei Bai frowned. There was only so much meat left at home. If it was thrown away, there would be nothing left to eat. Forget it, she'll just eat bread anyway. Isn't it just a special color? It won't kill anyone. So, Wei Bai put the things on the table. Xiaya was at the table, writing something with a pen. Wei Bai glanced over curiously. Xiaya gently raised his eyes and picked up a piece of paper. This is a potion list. Although I have lost my memory, I can still remember some things. A good potion list can be sold for money. After all, he couldn't just ask someone to deliver the money directly. Otherwise, there was no way to explain where the gold coins came from. He wanted to wait until the relationship between him and the little witch was more stable and profound. Only then did she slowly realize his special identity. Anyway, this was the identity of a substitute. He could continue to pretend. If the little witch couldn't accept his identity at all, then he wouldn't say it and hide it. But he couldn't always let the little witch starve and cold. She couldn't even bear to wear a beautiful dress. Her new dress. She really couldn't bear to wear it even once. His personality was too gentle and easy to bully, and too honest and simple. Chapter 25-34. The Duke, who was used to seeing aristocratic power and luxury, was a little not used to such a fresh and cute style. He also thought it through. He is more of a way to make them rich. Wait until one day he says that he sold a potion list and became a potion master or something. Then come back with a box of gold coins. Change houses, buy servants, and get a house full of jewelry, clothes, and jewelry. What other women have, she should have. The best, the most expensive, and the most beautiful. Should I order a dress in advance from a master tailor in the capital? A dress generally needs to be ordered half a year in advance, and then the finished product can only be obtained 3 or 4 months later. If I order now, I can get it by the end of the year. At that time, he can almost make a fortune with the little witch. Xiaya's beautiful fingers casually held the quill, the back of his hand supporting his chin, and his thick eyelashes suppressed the light in his eyes. The youth's contemplative appearance is unbelievably gorgeous. This is the first time he is thinking about how to make himself rich. When the little witch heard his words, she immediately showed an encouraging smile. Xiaya can definitely write a good potion list. Write more. When I finish selling the beautifying water, I will go to the pharmacy to promote it for you. Maybe I can sell 1 or 2. If one has 10 iron coins, you can buy some meat. 10 iron coins. The Duke looked at the potion list he wrote. Who dares to buy his potion list with 10 iron coins? He will pull out his sword and cut into 8 pieces. His handwriting is worth more than 10 gold coins. The Duke's thin lips coldly snorted, waiting for him to come back with a box of gold coins. He wants to let the little witch know what a genius is. The childish Duke threw down the quill, then wiped his hands with a handkerchief and prepared to eat. Today's broth, the color is a little strange. Is it a new ingredient? And it is also emitting an ominous aura. Xiaya. The little witch didn't seem to notice the strangeness of the broth. She held the bread and happily said, Xiaya, after eating, I will take you to a place. Xiaya held the spoon and tried to drink a mouthful of soup. Where? Wei Wei Bai smiled, her eyes softened, and her eyes were full of fragmented light. A very beautiful place. Xiaya couldn't think of anything better. His face was deathly pale. Today was the day his taste buds returned to normal. His sensitive sense of taste was once again crippled. He forced a stiff smile. Okay, I'll go after dinner. Then he looked out the window. The weather is so good today. The little witch couldn't help but turn to look at the weather. Grand Duke Xiaya, who had always been elegant and calm, and whose every move was painted, picked up the plate in embarrassment and poured the soup into the magic space. He could even hear the soup dripping into the spatial rift. There was a tearing sound of corrosion. Xiaya, he had just taken a sip. Could his stomach have been corroded as well? Did the little witch accidentally put in some witch poison when she was cooking? Xiaya put the plate on the table. The little witch looked back and saw his empty plate. Her face was full of admiration. Xiaya, you eat really fast, and your appetite has also increased. It seems that I have to make more food for you to eat. Xiaya's face was calm, but his tone was somewhat unstable. I think the amount of food now is just right. Any more and I won't be able to eat anymore. Wei Wei Bai chewed on the bread and asked with a vague smile, did my cooking improve? You used to despise my cooking and wouldn't let me cook. Xiaya was silent for a moment, and then he gave her a gentle smile. I didn't dislike you, I just couldn't bear to let you cook. Now that I've recovered, let me cook in the future. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Holding the bread, she lowered her head and took a bite of it. Her eyes, which were hidden behind the bread, curved with a smile. Xiaya, you're so nice. The past and the present are very nice, very nice. Xiaya felt as if his heart was kissed by a sweet cherry. He even felt suffocated by the sweetness and couldn't help but tug at his collar. Of course, he was very nice now. Sooner or later, she would forget the words everything was fine in the past. His goal was to be very nice now. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 25-35. After dinner, Wei Wei Bai cleaned up the table. As if there was something mysterious, she said to Xiaya, wait for me. Xiaya was casting a few healing spells on himself. He felt a little uncomfortable in his stomach and felt better after casting a few spells. Wei Wei Bai had already closed the door. He looked at the door and gently snapped his fingers. A thick stack of parchment paper hidden on the table appeared. More than a dozen birds flew in under his control. They held the parchment paper in their mouths and flew out. This was a pile of recent official business. He could only solve some of them when he was writing the potion list. Then, when the little witch didn't know, he would send the official business back. Seeing that the birds had flown away, Xiaya calmly turned around and was about to leave the window. The door opened. The time was just right. Xiaya was just thinking about this when he looked up and froze. Wei Wei Bai carefully walked out with her dress, her brown hair as smooth and beautiful as hot chocolate hanging behind her. A red hairband was cleverly tied with a soft bow hanging on the left side of her hair. Her bangs were scattered from the hairband. Her fair and delicate face was flushed with a rosy blush. The dress was the one he had chosen. The well-fitting dark red dress flowed down from her slender waist. The soft skirt was like the shape of a flower petal, quietly blooming around her ankles. Although the dress was made of cheap fabric, it couldn't stand up to the trend. It was the most beautiful design in the capital this year. Even if it was made of cheap fabric, the gorgeous effect could be seen. Not to mention that the person wearing it was as beautiful as a pure porcelain doll. Wei Wei Bai held the dress and stood uncomfortably. Seeing that he was looking at her without moving, she couldn't help but blush. "Don't I look good?" The young man's eyelashes moved and he finally came back to his senses. He seemed to be a little hot and reached out to tug at his collar, which was already a little messy. His beautiful collarbone was exposed. His fingertips accidentally rubbed against his collarbone, and his fingertips were a little white. Then, Xiaya slowly walked towards the little witch. The color of his eyes was extremely dense and deep. The purple in his eyes was like a river, giving off a strange and breathtaking feeling. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but stare into his eyes. It was a pair of extremely beautiful eyes. Even if he didn't have any emotions, he could still bewitch people. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her face turned even redder. As if she was shy, she was about to turn her face away. A pair of hands gently held her face. The soft skin of her cheeks in the hands of the youth was as gentle as holding a flower. His eyes flickered as he whispered, "Be good, don't move." Wei Wei Bai obeyed and did not move. But her eyes wandered, as if she couldn't stand being stared at by him like this. Xiaya couldn't help but smile, and then his fingers came to her hairband. The soft bow was deftly untied by him. The red hair band passed through the gaps between his fingers. The young man lowered his head seriously. His hair fell under his eyes, and his eyes were incomparably focused. He was even more focused than when he was facing the holy dragon skeleton. His fingertips very delicately circled around a corner of the red ribbon, and then finally tied a small knot. A gorgeous and beautiful rose that could almost be mistaken for a real one appeared in her ears. He made her unprofessional bow into a rose that required skill. Wei Wei Bai was a little curious. She looked up, but couldn't see Rose. // Chapter 2536. Instead, because she raised her head, her lips accidentally touched Xiaya's chin. Soft lips, a flash of contact. Xiaya's eyes deepened, but his smile became more wanton. Is this a reward? Wei Wei Bai quickly took a step back. She didn't answer, worried that he would say something shameful again. She just ran to get the hood and cloak in a panic. Then she wrapped herself up. She couldn't see the dress. Xiaya sighed a little regretfully. He must get rich quickly. He just saw the little witch walk out in a beautiful dress. The thought in his mind was, if he changed her into a few beautiful dresses every day. That would be great. Such a cute doll. If he really wanted to hide it, he would show it to himself. Then he would, personally change her clothes every day. Of course, this thought was too beastly, so he could only secretly suppress it. He didn't want to scare people. Although the little witch was a witch, but really, she was just unlucky to have a witch mother. She didn't have the qualifications to be a witch. She didn't have the self-awareness of a witch. She couldn't even make a magic potion. She didn't hurt people. She was just a kind little girl. Compared to her, Xiaya felt that he was more like a black-hearted male witch. His heart was full of vicious thoughts. Xiaya's eyes were deep with a few traces of greed, quietly peeping at the little witch who was packing things. The little witch's side profile was beautiful and pure. She didn't know what terrible disaster she had provoked. Xiaya silently blinked his eyes. Finally, he turned his terrifying viper-like eyes into gentleness. His voice was hoarse, and his sandy voice had a few traces of bewitching charm. "Where are we going?" The beautiful place she said made him look forward to it. Wei Wei Bai was carrying a small basket, and when she heard the question, her body stiffened. Then she whispered, "We'll know when we get there." Xiaya wasn't very curious. After all, he had been everywhere in the capital. Maybe the little witch wanted to go on a date with him. Xiaya was very calm, and in a good mood, he reached out and held her soft fingers. His gaze softened. "All right, then I'll follow you." Wei Wei Bai's cheeks were burning. "Do up the buttons first." "What do you look like?" The young man's collar was so messy that most of his shoulders were exposed, and there was also a beautiful section of his collarbone. However, he seemed to be completely unaware of how sinful his appearance was. Xiaya reached out and unhurriedly, as if he was going to button it. However, he used too much strength and accidentally pulled the collar even wider. He sighed. "What should I do? I can't even tie my collar properly. It seems that my fingers are stiff after I was resurrected." The little witch finally put down the basket. Then she pursed her lips and stared at him. There was no trace of lying in the Duke's eyes. Finally, the little witch sighed in resignation. "Lower your head." Xiaya smiled and obediently bowed his head. He raised his voice and said, "Yes, my master." Master. It was an honorific used by witches and servants to address witches. But his tone didn't seem to be respectful. Instead, it was more like a sigh of satisfaction from a greedy heart. Ancient black copper poles interweaved to form a long fence. The red roses symbolizing love bloomed all year round. The small church was somewhat dilapidated. However, it was still very popular. Because this was the place where the poor at the bottom of society got married. Xiaya was not prepared and was somewhat stunned for a moment. The small church was privately engraved with the magic array of the Church of Light. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on Chapter 2537. However, it had no effect. It was purely for decoration. The church was decorated with a lot of flowers, candles, and some very old bronze objects. The church was run by a down-and-out mage. A very unprofessional mage. It was obvious that he was here to make a living. The main business here was to accept weddings and write magic certificates. Because the mage secretly offered filial piety, the institution in the capital that specialized in registering married couples would also recognize the effect of the certificate. In this day and age, if one got married through formal channels, it would require a considerable amount of money. Some poor people couldn't afford it at all. That was why there was a black market for marriage, which was these small churches. It had something to do with the marriage agency in the capital. Then, they would secretly hold marriage ceremonies for the commoners at a low price. There were also some special groups of people who couldn't go through formal channels and would come here to get married. For example, witches, criminals, or elopement or something. And Wei Wei Bai was obviously a witch. And her relationship with the little baron was also an elopement. Or a criminal on the run. All of them. Of course, the marriage partner was the Duke. But she didn't know, but soon she would know. Because there were only 2 or 3 hours left before the 24 hours. She didn't think of a way to expose this substitute scam as logically as possible. She was going to be disfigured. Disfigured. Destroyed. Important things were repeated 3 times. Wei Wei Bai touched her face. Although it was far from the #1 beauty of her dream. It was really far away. But it was still the #1 product of the system. The pure #1 of the girl next door was also good-looking. Wei Wei Bai thought of the side quest and showed her the disfigured photo. It was 100% burned, plus full marks for the rotten ghost movie special effects. The appearance was uglier than a skeleton. It was a half-rotten skeleton. That disfigured photo was similar to a half-rotten skeleton. In this plane, the main quest was not important. The side quest was the main point. So she touched the black ribbon in the basket. This was the only good thing that witches made. Witches also had to get married. So the ancestors of the witch world did it for their lovers. They also made love ribbons. When they got married, the 2 of them would tie the ribbon. Magic power would maintain the emotions of the 2 of them. If the ribbon changed from black to red, it meant that the 2 of them were in love. The love ribbon did not have any side effects. Furthermore, it wasn't overbearing. It didn't even have the effect of sharing life and death with one another. There was only one effect, and that was to test one's sincerity. Turning red was love. It's up to you whether you want to turn red or not. And the reason why Wei Wei Bai liked this tape was not to test her sincerity. After all, favorability was a test of one's sincerity. She didn't need this. What she wanted was the useless function of the belt. While the ribbon was in effect, the real information of the 2 people would appear. His name, age, gender, and what kind of magic he practiced, to what extent. This is a gadget that comes with it. No one took a fancy to him. After all, you're already married. How can you not know all this information? Unless they were here to trick her into marrying him. Therefore, this ribbon was considered a rare item in the witch world. It did not have any side effects. He didn't curse people, but he still had some good things that were useful. However, this thing has been lost for a long time. Because the witches had no time to get married. In any case, since they had taken a liking to each other, they would just go for it. This was also the reason why witches had a reputation for being dissolute. // Chapter 2538. There were very few witches who got married, and no one used this ribbon. After a long time, the ribbon had been lost. It was impossible for the original owner's family to have one. She had to spend her life points to buy one in the supermarket. And the supermarket's product was the enhanced version. When the data appeared, it would definitely be high definition and clear. And the price was low. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was worth it to spend money for the first time. To have a reason to use this ribbon, she had to drag Xiaya to get married. Xiaya was stunned for a while before his thin lips moved slightly. You mean, get married? There was even a hint of awkwardness in his tone. This was really the thing that he was the most unfamiliar with. But it wasn't rejection, but a kind of surprise after being at a loss. It came too suddenly, and he was a little at a loss. He couldn't even be the most well-behaved and elegant side. He was more like a little boy who was at a loss. He repeated again. You mean, sign a marriage contract with me and become my wife? When he said this, the Duke's words were stuttering. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and was looking for the ribbon in the small basket. She heard Xiaoya's doubt. She was also stunned, and then her face turned red, and her eyes were incomparably shy. She said in a low voice without confidence, "You said that we would get married after settling down." When Xiaya heard this, a basin of cold water was poured over his head. The awkwardness just now was all awakened by this sentence. "Oh, that X-man said it." Xiaya's anger rushed to his head, and a trace of murderous intent flashed in his rich purple eyes. He was clearly dead. He also told himself that the person beside the little witch now was him. He would win in the end, no matter what despicable means he used. But she said something careless. Still woke him up. After all, the person she wanted to marry was that little baron. Not him. The smile on Xiaya's lips didn't change, but his aura was much colder and more terrifying. The little witch seemed to have sensed it, and her shy eyes changed, seeming to be puzzled. She was a little hesitant. "Xiaya, are you not willing to marry me?" Hearing this, the coldness in Xiaya's eyes disappeared. He reached out and pulled her into his embrace. Then he lowered his head and kissed her hood. The young man's tone was languid and affectionate. "Silly, why would I be unwilling? It's just that I can't remember. Every time I hear you mention the past, I feel a little sad that I've forgotten." Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief and immediately promised, "If you feel bad, I won't talk about the past anymore. Anyway, we have a future." Xiaya smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "Yes, we still have a future. So let the past disappear." As long as she stayed with him, he would dilute the past. After living together for a long time, her life was filled with traces of him. Nibbling away at a person's feelings was actually a very simple matter. Just like her. She clearly did not seduce him. She simply took care of him as her lover. His life and feelings had been eaten away by her step by step in such a simple manner. When he realized that something was wrong, he couldn't even control his heartbeat. The Duke had never been a conflicted person. Instead, he was an extremely selfish person. In an instant, he made the best and most despicable decision. "Although I've forgotten, my love for you has not changed. Of course, I'm happy to fulfill my promise and marry you." // To facilitate your next reading, you can click on at the bottom to record this reading record. Chapter 2539. Although the small church was a little simple. But as long as one pressed their fingerprint and wrote their name on the marriage contract, then the marriage contract could be recognized. This was also the result of the imperial institutions turning a blind eye. After all, they couldn't let the poor really not be able to get married. That would not be illegitimate children everywhere. This was also not good for the empire's rule. The mage in charge of the wedding was a wood element beginner mage. The wedding process was very simple. The marriage contract was 15 iron coins. If a mage was needed to preside over a romantic vow to each other for life, it would cost 3 more iron coins. And if they didn't prepare for the wedding, the two of them would wrap the ribbons around each other's wrists. They could also be bought here. 1 iron coin per ribbon. Everything was clear and simple. Wei Wei Bai took off her hood and put it on a chair in the church. The mage put the marriage contract on the table and was slightly stunned when he saw Wei Wei Bai, who had just taken off her cloak. He originally thought that seeing the youth was stunning enough. The girl who was matched with him was also too beautiful and pure. 2 people, one was the gorgeous and deep fire of hell. One was as pure and delicate as a snowflake. It was simply 2 extremes of beauty. Suddenly, the mage felt a murderous gaze. He looked up and saw the youth named Xiaya. Although he was smiling, his eyes were indescribably treacherous and cold. As if he dared to look at the girl again. It was as if he would kill him. The mage was terrified. He could do this line of work and his intuition was very strong. His intuition told him that this youth was not to be trifled with. And the mage could see the level of the mage who was weaker than him. He was considered to be more powerful among the beginner mages. But when he wanted to see the level of the youth's magic clearly, he could only see an incomparably deep darkness. It was so cold that it made his hair stand on end. Maybe it wasn't a pair of poor people, but criminals who couldn't pass the test of formal institutions. Although the mage thought a lot. But he didn't show the slightest difference. After all, the more you know, the faster you die. Wei Bai didn't beat around the bush and directly took out the ribbon from the basket. We don't need to buy a wedding ribbon. We can save an iron coin. She held a black ribbon in her fair fingers. The pure white and black looked exceptionally beautiful under the light. Ribbons were tied around the wrists of both parties. This was the wedding ceremony. The two of them tied the ribbon and then wrote their names on the marriage certificate and pressed their fingerprints. This meant that they would have to spend the rest of their lives together. Ribbons were even more indispensable. Regardless of whether it was a commoner or a noble, the wedding was grand or simple. This program had never changed since ancient times. Therefore, when Wei Bai took out the ribbon naturally and happily, no one was surprised or suspicious. Xiaoya's eyes fell on the ribbon as if he was observing something. But no matter how he looked at it, it was just an ordinary ribbon. Was it just because it was black in color? After all, most people would buy white or pink ribbons for their weddings. A light-colored ribbon, romantic and beautiful. It was rare to see a black ribbon. But then he thought that the little witch might have just casually found it at home. Other than saving money, there was nothing else in her little head. That strange discomfort was ignored because of the joy of getting married. Wei Bai looked at the ribbon in her hand. Her smile was still cute and pure. Chapter 2540. It was a supermarket product with an anti-detection effect. No matter how powerful a person was, they would find it to be an ordinary ribbon. After all, Xiaoya wasn't a small baron, but the famous Rose Duke. She didn't know how powerful his magic was. Not to be disfigured, she had really racked her brains. She was courting death. Speaking of it, there were tears. Wei Bai could only smile in the wind and cry silently, along with her beautiful face. She had ruthlessly trampled on the main mission. Favorability, goodbye. Side quest, little bastard, you're fucking ruthless. The mage coughed softly. Okay, please tie the ribbon, and then prepare to take the oath, sign, and put your fingerprint. It saved the money for the ribbon. But it didn't save 3 iron coins for the oath. Xiaoya reached out and took the ribbon in her hand. He casually rubbed his fingers against the black ribbon. There were a few wisps of witch's aura, but it was very faint. There shouldn't be anything strange. In fact, this was his instinctive action. He would take a few more glances at anything normal. Being suspicious and cautious had always been his strength. Xiaoya didn't really examine it carefully, because the ribbon didn't have any offensive magic attached. Then, even if there were other small differences, he didn't need to care too much. His eyelashes drooped slightly, and in his beautiful eyes, the purple light was clear and clean. Almost reverently, he held the little witch's fingers, hooked his fingertips, and slowly interlaced his 10 fingers together, holding it tightly. Then, the youth smiled and wrapped the ribbon around both of their hands. The soft black ribbon wrapped around the wrists, until it wrapped around both of their fingers. When tying the knot, Xiaoya naturally lowered his head, bit a corner of the ribbon, and tied a dead knot with one hand. When the youth lowered his head, his white back was slightly exposed under the collar, and his beautiful neck was incomparably elegant. As if on purpose, his thin lips softly rubbed against the inside of her delicate wrist. A gentle, ambiguous, and unusually domineering kiss was branded just like that. Wei Wei Bai's wrist trembled, and she bit her lip without saying anything. Xiaya raised his eyebrows and smiled even more happily. Then, he stood up straight, as if he was ordering a servant. Begin the oath. A vow was nothing more than a promise that the two of them would live hand in hand for the rest of their lives, be it illness or happiness. In the past, when Xiaya heard this, he felt that it was stupid. But when he heard, as the gods bear witness, under the glory, Wei Wei Aaron, are you willing to regard the man by your side as your only support, your lover, your husband, and your love will never diminish? As for the girl beside him, her smile was incomparably sweet. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright, and her tone was steady and solemn. Of course, I'm willing. At this moment, Xiaya's mind shook violently, and even his breathing stopped. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were wrapped in his palm. This heavy warmth made the Duke feel an indescribable sense of beauty. Xiaya lowered his eyes filled with a pure smile. He heard the magician ask, Shea West, are you willing to? Before he could finish speaking, he couldn't help but blurt out, I'm willing. Originally, he still had a dark and sinister plan in his heart, thinking of suppressing her in his hands. Marriage could also be used as a tool to bind people. But at this moment, there was no trace of reluctance in his heart. On the contrary, he really felt that this was the only wedding in his life. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 75. Chapter 25:41. And when they said yes, the color of the ribbon began to change. The ribbon was testing the man's love. The black ribbon gradually turned from white to pink. The mage opened the marriage contract and handed over the quill. Come, sign your name and press your fingerprint. The marriage contract will take effect tomorrow. After all, after signing the name, they still had to take it to a formal organization to register. He had this layer of relationship with her. The people in the organization would not check the name of the person on the marriage contract and would directly stamp it. Xiaya took the quill and signed his name. Although the little baron was also called Xiaya, his surname was Weiss. After all, it was just a very small, very distant branch of the Rose family. It had been too long, and in addition to the taboo, he did not dare to use West's name to mess around. So he changed it to Weiss. The little witch did not find anything wrong with the mage's name. Because the mage's accent was very vague. In addition, West was very close to Weiss, so it was even harder to discover. But the spelling on the marriage contract was his real name when he signed for the mage to make the marriage contract. The little witch knew at a glance that the surname was wrong. Xiaya's expression did not change. After signing the name and pressing his fingerprint, with a move of his fingertips, the spelling of West became Weiss. This was a trick. It would soon disappear and return to its original name. It would be enough to hide it from the little witch. Xiaya smiled and pushed the marriage contract in front of the little witch. Wei Wei, sign it. Wei Wei Bai took the quill and wrote Wei Wei Aaron. Although she was also called Wei Wei in this plane, her surname was not Bai. Her surname was Aaron. Wei Wei Bai deliberately wrote slowly, still thinking about when the ribbon would take effect. If it did not take effect, she would be disfigured. Disfigured. She still had to rely on the wedding to expose the true face of Liar Xia. She had never seen such a thick-skinned person. Normally, when she recognized her lover, wouldn't they directly say their true identity and say that they had recognized the wrong person? He actually shamelessly admitted it. What was even more shameless was that he pretended to have amnesia. At that time, the favorable impression points weren't that high, right? Could it be that he didn't expose her because he thought that it was fun for her to say that she loved him every day? When White Monkey reached the last stroke of his signature, his wrist suddenly burned. She immediately lowered her head. The ribbon actually turned into a peach-pink color. 75 favorable impression points. It was actually pink. Could it be that it was bright red? Before Wei Wei Bai can continue to think deeply, the red light falls on the marriage contract. The two people's information slowly turned from nothingness to a red glow, distorting the two people's specific information. Wei Wei Aaron, witch, civilian, female, magic abilities, almost none. Wei Wei Bai, he might as well just say that he didn't have any magic ability. Close to none. This was a blatant mockery. When Xiaya saw the information appear, his pupils shrank. He suddenly knew where the strange feeling that flashed through his mind came from. The witch's ribbon, an almost lost wedding item. There was no offensive nature, no curse, and no malicious aura. Its only function was to test one's love when they got married, as well as to display the real data. He stretched out his hand, and a golden magic light appeared on his fingertips. When he wanted to suppress the ribbon's power. But it was too late. Xiaya West, Holy Archmage, Aristocrat, Male, Magic Abilities, Unable to Calculate, Unfathomable. Wei Wei Bai's thumb was already stained with red mud, and she was just about to press her fingerprint. /T. Chapter 2542. But when she saw the information that appeared out of thin air, her expression was blank for a moment, as if she felt that something was wrong. The next moment, the young man's fingertips had already shattered the red light. The information distorted and disappeared. Wei Wei Bai was still looking at the place where the information appeared. Her lips trembled, and her thumb was almost at the signature. But at this moment, she looked at the young man beside her in disbelief. Xiaya's face was gloomy, his thin lips were tightly pursed, and his eyes were extremely sinister. But when Wei Wei Bai looked over, his expression changed instantly. He smiled gently. "What's wrong, Wei Wei? Put your fingerprint." After saying that, he reached out to hold her finger and help her put down the fingerprint. But Wei Wei Bai's fingertips trembled violently. She took a step back. Their other hands were tightly entwined with each other. When she stepped back, she almost fell. Wei Wei Bai repeated curiously. "Xiaya West." Xiaya's purple eyes stared at her without moving, his thin lips curled up, and the arc was extremely gentle. His tone was calm and had a hint of confusion. Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei originally wanted to directly erupt with a mistaken identity. But when she saw Xiaya's pure, clear, and confused eyes, her acting skills were stuck before she could even take over. When the information appeared just now, it disappeared too quickly. Xiaya made it clear that he wanted to muddle through the matter of his name. She was adamant that she had mistaken him for someone else. She was too sure. After all, the main mission still needed to be done. She had mistaken him for someone else and was exposed. In the future, there would still be a chance for them to get to know each other again and increase their favorability. But if she was suspected, it was all a scheme. Then it would be an awkward meeting between the two actors. In the future, when they see each other, they would be so embarrassed that they would want to die together. Don't even think about favorability. Seeing the struggle on Wei Wei Bai's face, Xiaya's eyes were filled with confusion. Xiaya's eyes were deep and gorgeous, and a trace of sad innocence appeared on his fair face. "Do you suddenly regret marrying me?" Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled as if she was hesitating. Xiaya leaned forward and touched the back of her hand with her fingers that weren't wrapped around the ribbon. He did not exert any force. It was as if he was coaxing a small, scared animal. The young man unhurriedly placed his chin gently on her thin shoulder. He said softly, "Wei Wei, don't you want to be in love with me for the rest of our lives? My little Aaron." There was such a detail in the information. That dead Baron liked to call her Little Erin. This was because when they first met, she had only said her surname. He didn't tell them his name. The Baron could only call her Miss Erin, and later they became intimate. He called her Little Erin. This was the most intimate form of address between them. Shia felt really jealous. And he had no choice but to use this matter to make her lower her guard. The Duke had always been unscrupulous. His tone was affectionate, but in a place where Wei Bai couldn't see, his eyes were terrifyingly cold. The twisted jealousy made his purple eyes seem even colder and sharper. He could only endure the unspeakable grievance. Wei Bai felt that the plan to shed all pretense of cordiality was stuck. Even the details were out. She had met a veteran actor and was caught off guard. She fell into a deep dilemma. Should she disfigure herself or destroy the main mission? /T. Chapter 2543. Then she told the system about this problem. The system was also silent for a moment, then it flipped through the supermarket. The lucky box is on sale. Do you want to buy it? Even if it was the same product, the price would be different when it was on sale. The discount this time was quite big. It was very cost-effective. By Wei, the lucky box is that thing where the luck value can't be grasped at all. Do you want to buy it? Shea's deep voice sounded again. His breath was seductive, and his fingertips rubbed the back of her hand. The gentle young man's posture was so humble. If you regret it, I'm fine. The information that appeared just now definitely didn't match with the dead Baron. Because even if the Baron studied light magic. But he was definitely not a divine archmage. The Empire's only divine archmage. Only him. No matter how bad the little witch's magic was, she still had basic common sense. So what Shea said and did now was to confuse her. They were all trying to confuse her judgment. They didn't mention any information at all. They just insisted that she regretted it. It made her doubt if she had seen wrongly. Wei Bai felt that she had really met an expert. She said in annoyance, "Buy it." She had to try the lucky box. Otherwise, she would have directly asked Shea about the information. There wasn't enough time. Because Shea had made it clear that he wouldn't admit it, and the information appeared in a short period of time. Who could be sure that she wasn't mistaken? This doubt could involve her disfigurement. She couldn't expose his identity. After making a wish, she casually opened the lucky box. Wei Bai thought in despair, at the last minute before her disfigurement. She directly fell out with him, pointed at his nose, and called him a liar. After all, disfigurement was much more serious than no favorability. Just as she was gathering her strength and preparing to fall out with him. Suddenly, the sound of horse hooves came from outside the church. It was like the violent sound of cavalry on an expedition. The young man who was coaxing the little witch had a cold gaze. When he heard the noise, he turned his eyes and looked outside the church. Outside the simple church, the cavalry surrounded the church. The roses were trampled all over the ground. Wei Bai woke up from her daze and looked outside as well. A row of guards rushed in through the open door. Then, a man wearing a saint's white robe slowly walked over. It was Prince Pellegrini. Acting like a pompous actor, he shouted, "Ah, Duke Wester, why are you here? I heard there was a witch here, so I immediately came to capture her." Shea froze. His identity was suddenly exposed. Even if he was an experienced and astute person, he still couldn't do anything. He was momentarily stunned as well. Wei Bai and the system were speechless. This exposure came without hesitation and without any hesitation. It was neat and tidy. This was the first time he had experienced the effect of not being discounted at all. She and the system were moved to tears of joy. So this was the taste of luck. This was the first time Su Tong, who had always been an unlucky duo, had bought such a good discount product. Xiaya stiffened for a few seconds before finally leaving Wei Wei Bai. He stood up straight gracefully, his every movement languid and graceful. The little witch, who had already been fooled, now had a look of shock on her face. She looked at him strangely, panic in her eyes, as if she couldn't understand what was going on. When the information appeared, she was just puzzled. But now, fear and panic appeared on her face. If it was someone else, to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 2544. How could he fool her? He must have mistaken her for someone else. But at this moment, it was Pigri who came. Whether or not he was here to catch the witch, he was here for him. He just wanted to continue lying. This prince who came here to cause trouble would not cooperate. Xiaya's eyes were a little blurred and suppressed. He seemed to be thinking about something. His bandaged fingers pinched her hand harder. She even pinched her fingers until they hurt. Wei Wei Bai was frightened and her body trembled violently. She stared at his face strangely. Then, she seemed to be recalling something. Her face was blank and full of disbelief. In the end, it was as if she wanted to know the truth but didn't dare to reveal it. Her hand, which was hurting from his pinch, couldn't stop trembling. She trembled and finally said, You are not." It was so difficult to say that she had mistaken him for someone else. Her voice was choked and almost suppressed in her throat. It was as if she was sobbing. Xiaya could hear her voice close to tears. He seemed to be helpless and could only sigh in the end. Then, Grand Duke Xiaya looked down at her gently. He stretched out his fingertips and gently touched her eyes that she was afraid of. His round and curved fingernails touched her eyelashes and eyelids. It was so gentle that it was as if he wanted to eat her. Don't be afraid. It's just a bug that's disturbing us. Why are you so afraid? Don't you still have me? Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled and she wanted to retreat. But she found that he was holding her wrist tightly. It was a gentle feeling, but there was a chilling aura oppressing her. Xiaya, who had pretended to be gentle for too long, revealed a smile at this moment, although there was still a trace of gentleness in it. But it was unusually strange and gorgeous. It wasn't as sunny and beautiful as the little baron in her heart. Wei Wei Bai seemed to wake up from a deep dream. She finally gasped softly. You are not Xiaya. Who are you? There was no gentleness in Xiaya's smile. Instead, there was a hint of laziness and indifference. An elegant and casual posture. It was full of the temperament of the rotten and extravagant aristocratic world. His voice was low and hoarse, hiding a bottomless darkness. Who else could I be? Am I not your lover? Wei Wei Bai looked at the indifferent progress bar. Time was almost up. He didn't have time to talk nonsense with Xiaya. The panic in her eyes was replaced by clear anger. Your name is Xiaowished. You are a member of the Rose family, not him. She finally stopped lying to herself. Instead, he mustered up the courage to reveal everything. The weak and easily bullied little witch was actually a little fool who dared to die together with others when she was determined. Xiaya felt that everything was screwed up. He lazily tugged at his collar. In fact, he didn't like civilian clothes that were too restrictive. Especially around the collar, if it was too tight, it would always be a little uncomfortable. The Duke, who was used to being carefree, was very calm at this moment. He tugged at his collar, and a few buttons flew out from his fingers. He seemed indifferent. Yeah, I'm not your Xiaya. He had thought that it would be a long time before the truth would be revealed. He had thought of a lot of ways to appease the little witch. After all, at that time, their relationship would definitely be deep. He could at least replace that shabby little baron. He had revealed the truth so early. Sure enough, the little witch was going to run away. Chapter 25:45. Under Xiaoya's long and narrow eyelashes, a pair of indifferent purple eyes were frozen like ice. But he was still smiling. His smile was beautiful, but also scary. Especially when he noticed that Wei Wei Bai's fingers were desperately trying to break free from the ribbon. Pigri brought a group of people to see this scene. They said they were here to catch the witch, but in fact, they noticed that Rose Duke was here. Out of conspiracy theories, Pigri brought people here to see if Xiaoya was up to something big. In the end, this scene left him at a loss. The conspiracy didn't happen, and Xiaoya West didn't die. He couldn't help but look at Wei Wei Bai. This scene looked like a wedding. But it was especially absurd, because Grand Duke West was getting married in this damn place. It was obviously illogical. But just as his eyes fell on Wei Wei Bai, before he could see clearly, the scene in front of him had changed. Space transfer magic, Pigri and all the guards who followed were teleported away in an instant. Pigri looked at the huge beast in front of him, as well as all kinds of terrifying monsters. This was the barren land. Legend has it that this was a training ground with a slim chance of survival. A cold wind blew, and Prince Pigri looked at a pile of magic monsters with drooling, silently petrified. And Wei Wei Bai just blinked. Everyone in the church disappeared, including the mage who officiated at the wedding. The group of people just now was better. Although the atmosphere was bad, at least it was lively. Now it was a dilapidated church, just like a scary haunted house. There was also a ghostly and gorgeous young man beside her. It was a very scary atmosphere of murder and burial. So her fingers exerted more force, broke free from his fingers, and also pulled apart the ribbon that tied the two of them together. A peach-red ribbon. The moment she left, it turned into an ominous black color, hanging on Xiaoya's wrist. Wei Wei Bai was almost at a loss as she ran away from him. She stepped back and bumped into the table. The marriage certificate on it also shook. Wei Wei Bai's face was pale, and her breathing was disorderly. She covered her mouth with her fingers. "So you've been lying to me." Xiaoya's thin lips were still curved into a smile, but he didn't look happy at all. His gaze moved down and saw the lonely ribbon on his wrist. His fingertips almost turned white as he gripped the ribbon. Then he tilted his head and said gently, "Are you talking about amnesia, or the fact that I'm not your lover?" In fact, the small mission was already completed. The mission's progress bar. Wei Wei Bai didn't expect that the atmosphere would become so strange and stiff. It was simply impossible. He couldn't possibly say that he had mistaken her for someone else just now and then say that he wanted to make up with her now. Several plans flashed through by Wei Wei's mind, but none were suitable for the current atmosphere. So she thought, quickly. 2. I'll think of a way to reconcile with you in the future. Xiaoya. Xiaoya slowly stepped forward. She obviously wanted to get out of here. So she looked to the left, where the door to the church was. Xiaoya stretched out his fingers and snapped them hard. The crisp sound of fingers rang out. In the silent church, the door creaked. Then, with a bang, the door was tightly shut. The sunlight was also shut out. In the dark church, the gorgeous and strange boy stood quietly, / to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 25:46. His collar was open, and the pale skin of his neck was exposed. Exquisite and dangerous. It was as gentle as a discussion. His smile was beautiful, and his deep eyes were full of twisted passion. So what if you mistook me for someone else? I don't blame you. Don't we have a good life? You can treat me as him. I don't care at all. Shea smiled. I really don't mind, little Aaron. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she said almost acidly, don't call me that. From the panic after mistaking him for someone else to the anger after he woke up, Shea saw it all. There was a sharp pain in his chest. It was a pain that was more severe than any of the attacks he had received before. It was almost unbearable. He thought that the stand-in game was fun. In the end, it ended up in such a miserable state, which was something he had never expected. He lowered his head in discomfort. His messy hair covered his eyes. His fingers were still clutching that band tightly. Between the strands of hair, he saw the girl covering her mouth. Her eyes were full of disbelief and shock, as well as tears of fear. The joy of marrying him just now was gone. Almost pleading, Shea said softly, Wei Wei, you mistook me for someone else in the beginning. This was her fault, wasn't it? He had never said that he was that, Shea. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. She seemed to think that what he said made sense. Shea tried to explain. I did lose my memory. I forgot who I was. And I'm called Shea. I only believed you when you told me that we were in love. Wei Wei Bai, oh my God. She tricked him. Now it was his turn to trick him. The tricks of the drama queen were really like a Russian doll. One trick after another. If the information hadn't appeared, she would have been fooled. He was in the state of a necromancer, not a real dead person. That medicine didn't work on him at all. Amnesia my foot. It was the drama queen who was watching the show from beginning to end. Wei Wei Bai frowned. After all, there was still the main mission. She had to take the favorability into consideration. If he hurt her too badly, he wouldn't be able to increase her favorability in the future. Wei Wei Bai was considering if she should pretend to forgive him. Of course, marriage was out of the question. The substitute quest was blocked. She still had to love that little bastard Baron. Therefore, he decided to soften his attitude and deal with it. Wei Wei Bai wept as she considered the gains and losses. Then, the panic in her eyes lessened. She seemed to have been convinced. Xiaoya's voice became softer. I slowly remembered who I was later, but I already like you. I like you very much. The way the young man admitted defeat made him look like a harmless child. Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a hint of struggle before she finally released her lips. Then, she forced herself to remain calm. It's my fault. I thought that your personality had changed greatly because of the magic potion. I didn't expect that I had mistaken you for someone else. Xiaya calmly gazed at her and did not speak. Wei Wei Bai forced an ugly smile. I think we should all calm down and leave this place first. After that, she straightened her body and walked forward as if her legs were weak. When she passed by the young man, Xiaya suddenly shouted softly, Wei Wei, can't you treat me as him? These words were so humble that it made her heart ache. Wei Wei Bai was about to nod. But she was worried that the side quest would come out and cause trouble. After thinking about it, she shook her head. I'm sorry, the Xiaya in my heart is not you. / Chapter 2547. After saying that, the progress bar of the side mission actually moved forward a little. Why did the progress bar move by itself? Although it was a good thing, what did she say just now? That was why it moved. If she could complete the side mission as soon as possible, she would of course have to think more about how to complete it. Wei Wei Bai thought as she took a step forward. The completely unguarded girl's wrist was suddenly grabbed by someone. Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath, this strength was about to crush her bones. She quickly turned around. But she saw Xiao lowering his head, his fair and slender fingers clasped on her wrist. And his other hand was holding a ribbon, which he was unhurriedly wrapping around her wrist. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. What are you doing? Could it be that he flew into a rage out of humiliation and planned to retaliate by beating her up or hanging her up? Xiao gently raised his eyes and said with a smile, getting married, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai, this atmosphere was obviously not suitable for marriage. Her fingers couldn't help but exert force, wanting to struggle. But in the next moment, she saw the youth in front of her, his gentle face changed. The sinister darkness in his eyes was revealed just like that, as terrifying as a beast opening its fangs. There was never a gentle and amiable duke. Cruelty and coldness were the true colors of this empire's dictator. He played with her and accidentally took it seriously. So even if she found out the truth and wanted to leave, sorry, it was too late. He didn't stop. How could she dare to leave? Xiao raised his eyes, his purple eyes containing a frightening smile. You want to leave just because you recognized the wrong person? His tone was still gentle, but his eyes were dark and burning. Since you don't want me as a substitute, then I won't play this childish game with you. From now on, listen to me. After saying that, he asked very politely, okay? While asking with a smile, the black ribbon in his hand became abnormally long because of magic. He pulled her into his arms, the girl's soft body was bound by the black ribbon. Her hands that wanted to struggle were tightly bound. Her feet that wanted to escape were also tripped by the ribbon. By the time Wei Wei Bai reacted, she was already pressed on the table by Xiao. Her body was like a cocoon, unable to move. The youth held her hands with one hand and leaned down unhurriedly, his warm chest like a terrible cage. Enveloping her. His eyes were full of affection. There is still the last step of the wedding, be good, let's imprint. There was only the last step. With just one handprint, their wedding was complete. Wei Wei Bai was dumbfounded. This was obviously a dark change, this was the experienced Wei Wei Bai. Also felt she had met. Didn't he say that he would take it slow and steady? From the beautiful farming and sweet literature, it flew straight to the dark horror film. It was clear that the side quest did not intend to let her off easily. It always appeared when she was at her most desperate. Tell her, don't worry, there is still more despair. Ding, the substitute side mission is forcibly activated. You are my white moonlight, you are my mosquito blood. Before the completion of the side mission, you must let the Grand Duke of Mosquito Blood know at all times that the person you love is the little Baron of the White Moonlight, and not him, the substitute. Let every substitute experience the despair and pain of being a substitute. A substitute has no future, a substitute has no love. This is the mission of the substitute mission. Wei Wei Bai. / you can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like. Chapter 2548. She finally knew why the side mission was called a substitute mission. She made up a fake case of mistaken identity. The side mission took advantage of her and turned the fake into the real thing. Not only that, it made her cry until the end of the story. What was the worst about the substitute story? It was just that no one loved a substitute. Side mission, no one loves, no one loves, no one loves. Paw. The system calmly finished the side mission and threw it into the trash can. Wei Wei Bai, on the long mahogany table. Scattered quills and red mud prints, the young girl's hairband had already come loose, and the dark red dress was like a blooming red rose that was about to wither. Her eyes were still trembling, as if she didn't understand what was about to happen to her. Her bound hands were dragged little by little towards the marriage contract. The red mark on her thumb had been rubbed away a lot. Xiaya didn't care much. The curve of his smile was elegant, but his words were casual with suppressed firmness. When we are together in the future, you don't have to worry about life. I'm not like some useless man who will make you suffer. He said until here. He couldn't help but laugh and whisper, "Isn't that right, little Aaron?" A jealous boy, no matter how beautiful he was scary. Wei Bai looked at the mosquito blood on Xiaya and hardened her heart. She used all her strength to break free from his fingers. Then she used the hand tied with the ribbon to hit his face. Xiaya gently raised his hand and blocked her fingers. Then he clenched his fist. Wei Bai's face turned pale. Her eyes had calmed down. "Let go of me, are you crazy? I mistook you for someone else, I don't know you at all." Completely rejected. It was more cruel than any words. Even if she said she didn't love him, didn't like him. In the end, she didn't know him. Xiaya felt that his heart was too gentle to her. But she still shouted recklessly, "I don't know who you are, I mistook you for someone else, I'm sorry, stop this ridiculous behavior, the wedding is even more impossible, the person I love is not you." That was what she said. She was so ruthless that she deserved to be a vicious witch. She gritted her teeth and said, "The person I love is Shayavis. I'm sorry, so can you let me go now?" She seemed to think that all she had to do was say that she recognized the wrong person. A careless apology. He would be able to resolve his own calamity. Xiaya finally sighed and lowered his eyes. He wanted to restrain himself and even stretched out his fingers to smooth his hair. Her honey-colored curly hair ran messily through his fingers. His fingers gripped so hard that they turned white. Then, his fingers slid down and came to his eyes. Through the gap between his fingertips, his purple eyes revealed a terrifying malevolence. Finally, the sharp pain in his heart turned into monstrous madness. It made his reason disappear. Wei Bai looked at the horizontal bar above her head and moved again. It turned out that he only needed to emphasize the identity of Xiaoya's substitute. In addition, he said a few fictional confessions of love from the white moonlight. Only then would the index rise. Wei Bai was just about to shout a few more words, "Bai Yueguang is my love." Her cheeks were suddenly pinched and her body was fiercely pressed down. Before she could struggle, her thumb was already firmly dragged to the marriage contract. He leaned over and touched her lips with his. He whispered softly, "Okay, stop messing around. I'm angry, // to facilitate your next reading, you can click on." Chapter 2549. He ordered some food to replenish energy, hot towels, hot tea, and so on. The only time the butler almost saw the girl. It was late last night. A petite figure suddenly ran out of the door. The slender and beautiful figure stumbled. But in the next moment, a pair of gentle and strong hands reached out from the door and carried her back. There was not even a sound. The girl did not have time to show her face. Before she was carried into the room, her pale and weak fingers seemed to want to grab the door. But in the end, her fingertips slipped through the door panel and disappeared without grabbing anything. The door closed again, as if nothing had happened. The butler was so scared that he did not dare to guard the door in the middle of the night. He could only stay far away. He waited for the bell to ring before he dared to bring people to guard the door. If he saw something he should not see, he might not be able to keep his life. The fire burning in the fireplace warmed the entire gorgeous and comfortable room. On the gorgeous and flashy bed, layers of gauze quietly hung down. A slender and elegant figure came down from the bed. The young man was barefoot, casually wearing pajamas, revealing the skin on his chest. Traces of laziness and frivolity appeared on his fair skin. He was like any mediocre aristocrat who was obsessed with something. His purple eyes were even filled with excessive satisfaction and drunkenness. Xiaya slowly walked to the door and half opened it. The butler lowered his head and waited outside. Seeing that the door was open, he lowered his head even more respectfully. Then, silently, more than a dozen people sent trays of things into the door. No one dared to raise their heads. Then, they obediently turned around and left. The door closed again. The butler left silently with more than a dozen servants. The gorgeous and huge castle was still oppressive and quiet. No one dared to disturb the duke. Xiaya picked up the warm honey water and got on the bed. He gently picked up the sleeping girl from the thick velvet bedding. Then, he took a sip of water and fed it to her. The young man's eyelashes suppressed the deep light in his eyes. A touch of rich purple was faintly discernible. After he finished feeding the water, his face was close to her soft cheek. "Fever," he murmured in a low voice. The young man with the perfect and exquisite side profile showed a trace of annoyance. Then, he reached out and drew a healing magic circle in the air. The golden magic power flowed into the body of the girl in his arms. After a while, the temperature of her hot breath finally dropped. Wei Wei Bai's frown also eased a little. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to wake up. A finger gently pressed on the space between her eyebrows. Xiaya lowered his eyes and calmly waited. Soon, she fell into the deepest sleep. After all, she was sick and needed a good rest. For the past few days, as long as she was conscious, she would argue with him. Even though he knew that he couldn't escape, he still struggled pitifully like a pitiful butterfly whose wings were broken. Just looking at it made Xiaya feel uncomfortable. However, he became even angrier. Once he got angry, he couldn't control his behavior. This made her even more afraid of him. It was simply a vicious cycle. Although he felt that the experience of the past few days was actually more like a beautiful dream. However, Wei Wei might not think so. Xiaya's eyes, which had regained his rationality, were clear and chagrined. He looked helplessly at the sleeping Wei Wei Bai. For a moment, he actually didn't dare to wake her up. Instead, he quietly half-hugged her, like an evil dragon guarding its princess. Day and night, he used the most vicious and cautious thoughts to guard her, not daring to leave even half a step. Wei Wei Bai didn't know how long she had slept for. She felt like she was going to die. Her heart ached. She had actually bought a substitute sticker. In the end, it wasn't enough. The life points were not worth it. She had the heart to strangle Xia Mosquito to death. Chapter 2550. Although there was a supermarket promotion recently, and all kinds of products were on sale. However, the discount on the substitute sticker was too small. She bought 2 for 50 HP. It sounded good. She didn't want to buy it. However, she was tormented by Xiaya to the point that if she didn't buy it, she would die in the next second. He was even more of a jerk than the side missions. He was her target. Psychopath, teddy bear maniac, shameless. After she bought the substitute sticker, she thought that she could finally be free. Although it was just a spiritual release, she thought that the sticker was delicious. However, she didn't expect that. The past was unbearable. 2 was nothing. She couldn't handle it without a dozen. It was not enough. If she had known, she wouldn't have bought the substitute sticker. She should have bought a kidney deficiency poison and poisoned Xiaya to death. Her head hurt, her heart ached, and her flesh ached. It was not easy for him to wake up, so he specially asked about it. Has the summer doll left? Wasn't it the summer doll? It was the same when it came to doing bad things. It was endless. When the system realized that it could come out, it heard the host's words and immediately said, "It's still here." Wei Bai. What are you doing? The system, touching the dress. Wei Bai, she wanted to pretend to faint, but she couldn't stop her eyelashes from trembling because of her weak body. Then, she heard the young man's gentle voice. Are you awake? Wei. Xiaya was tidying the dress that he had just made when he heard her breathing become irregular. He put down the dress and lay on the bed. His fingers touched her hair as he called out to her gently. The girl's eyelashes trembled and she frowned. There was an unnatural flush on her face, charming and beautiful. She forced her eyelids open. When she saw him, fear and anger flashed in her eyes. Xiaya quietly lowered his eyes and pursed his lips. It would be a lie to say that he regretted it. He didn't regret getting her at all. He was about to pretend that nothing happened and carry her up. However, he heard the little witch's hoarse voice, cold and ruthless. Get lost. The smile on Xiaya's face gradually disappeared. His long and narrow eyelashes drooped, and his beautiful and flawless face had a kind of strange beauty that was frozen in ice. Although he didn't regret it. However, he also felt a throbbing pain in his heart. He couldn't help but sigh softly from the prolonged pain. In the process of digesting his power, his personality had changed greatly. During this period of time, he had become terrifyingly irritable. He did not have the slightest bit of patience. He had always been cold and repressive. 3 days ago, because of her complete rejection, the power in her body backfired. His personality had become dragonized. What was the character of a dragon? Violent, overbearing, and lustful. They were unscrupulous in snatching their treasures. Then came the crazy protectiveness that led to possessiveness. If the person he was guarding didn't want him, then he would lock her up in the tower and not let her go anywhere. This was the nature of dragons. And this instinct was completely stimulated by Wei Bai's back view as she turned and left. For the past 3 days, he had been unbridled, crazy, and evil without bottom line. And it was the result of him trying his best to suppress it. Just like now, once she looked at him with cold, disgusted eyes. He couldn't control himself. So don't look at him like that. Before she lost control, her fingers pulled out a silk ribbon from the white porcelain plate beside the bed. Then, just when Wei Bai was completely unable to struggle, her eyes were bound by the ribbon. There was a pile of various dark ribbons entangled on the plate. Slash. Chapter 25:51. If it weren't for these things covering her eyes these few days, just based on her hateful gaze, there was a possibility that he would torture her to death. Wei Bai only felt that the young man on top of her was so strong that it was terrifying. In the darkness, she only felt his gentle fingers that wanted to strangle her, touching her neck bit by bit. His fingertips were a little forceful. Her skin was imprinted, and she couldn't help but cower and want to escape. Xiaya's smiling voice sounded softly. Wei, the weather is good today. Shall we go for a walk? Wei Bai, let go of me, lunatic. Side mission bar, progress 50%. In these 3 days, she found that the progress bar had actually accelerated. So she tried her best and used all kinds of methods to emphasize. You're not Xiaya, you big liar. You saw the result. The progress bar advanced to 50. The strange thing was that the favorability also increased. It increased to 80. Every time the target was abused, the favorability would increase. Wei Wei Bai couldn't understand. She always thought that when she started doing side missions, the favorability of the main mission should decrease. In the end, it increased instead of decreasing. She could only sigh. The target was like a lunatic, and she couldn't use normal eyes to look at it. This caused her to change the way of the strategy. Anyway, the favorability would still increase after being abused. So let's hurt each other. The more hurt, the happier. In the darkness, the young man seemed to be silent for a moment. Then he muttered softly. I am. These two simple words had lost their powerful protective shell. It actually gave people a sense of vulnerability. Wei Wei Bai's heart was about to soften. Anyway, it was already 50. Rest for a while. So she also closed her mouth. Her thin lips were tightly pursed, and the flush on her face faded a little. She looked a little pale and helpless. But at least she didn't have the aggression of perishing together like just now. Her soft face was turned sideways, and dark black ribbons were wrapped around her eyes. Under the small bridge of her small nose were pursed red lips. It was rare for the little witch to show weakness, but she didn't know how terrible the eyes of the seemingly fragile boy were. In Xiaoya's purple eyes, there was a trace of golden madness that was close to covetousness. He suppressed his breathing and closed his eyes for a while. Only then did he suppress the crazy greed in his heart. The fusion of power was almost done. However, the dragon-like possessiveness of the little witch remained. This won't do. She hated him so much. He was still unable to be gentle with her and patiently coax her. In that case, she would try her best to run away. Otherwise, she would break her leg. She couldn't see it anymore. That way, she wouldn't be able to escape. This incomparably morbid thought came too suddenly and naturally. Xiaya even revealed a dangerous smile as his fingertips slid over her fragile ankle. The poor girl didn't know what was going on. She pursed her lips and resisted him with her stubbornness. Xiaya's fingers caressed her feet, and he finally suppressed his impulse. He smiled gently, but his tone was still careful and ingratiating. Wei Wei, what do you like to eat? I'll get someone to prepare it, okay? Wei Wei Bai, get lost, I won't eat the food of a liar like you. She scolded him over and over again. He was just a liar, shameless, crazy, and so on. The repetition rate was frighteningly high. She really didn't hurt him when she scolded him. Even when her voice was fierce, the sweetness in her voice was more obvious. Slash. Chapter 2552. As long as he didn't see the hatred in her eyes, he didn't feel uncomfortable at all. Xiaya calmly reached out and easily carried her out of the blanket. Then he held her struggling hands with one hand and began to change her clothes. The dress was gorgeous. It was the latest winter dress for noble women. The patterns on the hem of the dress were made of fine rusted threads hammered from gold. The three-dimensional flowers on the cuffs were real gems. It was so luxurious that it was jaw-dropping. But it didn't feel gaudy at all. It was his first time seeing a woman's dress, and he couldn't suppress the joy in his heart. Because he had prepared this dress for her. Choosing clothes for his wife. It was an unimaginable cowardly behavior in the noble circle. But to Xiaya, it was a ritual to make sure that she was his. Everything about her was under his control. Even the dress was chosen by him, and he even helped her wear it. The possessive duke pretended to be pitiful while happily dressing up the little witch. System, Wei Wei Bai even asked, is Xia Mosquito very sad and painful? Did I torture her too much? System. If you say so, then so be it. It wasn't that he hadn't seen people who became more perverted the more they were abused. But it was the first time he had seen someone who became more perverted and happy the more perverted they were. The system felt that it was better not to let the host know. It was worried that, the host was already perverted enough, what if she was infected to become even more perverted? The system was worried sick for the host's 3 views and moral integrity. Rose Castle was gorgeous. The furnishings, the architectural design. They were all extremely extravagant and cumbersome. The Old Kingdom castle couldn't compare to the newly built Rose Castle at all. This castle was specially built by everyone in the family for the Duke's coming-of-age ceremony as a gift. After all, most of the power in the Rose family was now. They all came from Xiaya. He was the only divine great mage in 100 years. He was also the only divine great mage alive in this world. The entire Rose family was built around Xiaya. So when Xiaya informed everyone to gather, he planned to name the people outside the family. No matter how surprised or unbelievable it was. All the important members of the family were there. The lake water outside the castle had already turned into a thin layer of ice. The snow fell on the red flowers. The hall was brightly lit. The ancient aristocratic mannerisms were filled with a sense of ceremony and elegance. The antique conference table had been cleaned and replaced with golden candlesticks and roses. Grand elders dressed in noble attire, each of them holding an ancient book in their hands, slowly walked in. Shea informed everyone to come. He declared that he would also bring the original name list of his family. Because tonight, a new member of the Rose family would be born. In an instant, everyone's mind flashed. Could he be the illegitimate son of the Rose family? Or was it the child of the Grand Duke of Rose? In any case, there were all kinds of guesses, but none of them were correct. Therefore, when the door of the conference room opened, an elegant and slender figure pushed a delicate and beautiful wheelchair into the room. Everyone stared at him with their mouths agape. The girl sat quietly in her wheelchair. Black ribbons bound her eyes. Only the lower half of her face was exposed, as well as her beautiful red lips. Her fingers were weakly placed on the armrest of the chair. The gorgeous and beautiful dress could not hide her purity and beauty. Chapter 2553. Instead, it was like a snow-white pearl that grew out of a gorgeous flower. They had always been used to seeing the Grand Duke's extremely beautiful appearance. They thought that there was no one in this world who could stand beside the Grand Duke and not be outdone. In the end, they didn't expect. There was actually someone who stood beside the Grand Duke. Not inferior at all. Even another extreme beauty. All of a sudden, everyone felt a deathly cold stare. Only then did everyone realize how dark and terrifying the eyes of the youth standing behind the wheelchair were. Immediately, everyone withdrew their gazes at the same time. They were afraid that if they looked again, they would go blind. Xiaya pushed the wheelchair to the side of the main seat, almost lined up with the main seat. The young man in noble clothes, his every move elegant and wanton, the beautiful silver pocket watch chain hanging down from the front of his clothes. The gemstone buttons were the same style as the buttons of the girl's dress. The golden satin pattern on the sleeves was exactly the same as the cuffs of the girl's dress. It was simply a couple's outfit. This year, gorgeous and resplendent dressing was very popular in the capital. But not many people could wear this style of clothing. After all, most of the time, the brilliance of a gem could make a nobleman with an ordinary appearance appear dull and dull. Even the members of the Rose family, who had always been famous in the noble circle for their good looks. There were few who could wear a pile of gemstones and not feel gaudy. And obviously, the two in front of them were stunning exceptions. Wei Wei Bai seemed to feel uncomfortable. She tilted her head. Her beautiful brown hair was tied by a beautiful and clean lake blue ribbon. Silver tassels hung from the ribbon. She frowned as if she had sensed that there were people around, but she couldn't be sure. Xiaya sat calmly on the main seat, his fingers clasped with her weak fingers. Another chair appeared beside the main seat. It was still a wheelchair. This method of declaring sovereignty. Everyone looked at each other, and even felt a little uneasy. Xiaya saw that everyone had arrived. His expression was indifferent, and his eyes were cold and deep. Bring me the original list of the family. Xiaya had just finished speaking. The great elder had slowly stood up and said respectfully, Xiaya, can you explain the situation? Calling Xiaya by her name was a show of affection. However, this intimacy also contained a bit of trembling probing. She heard Xiaya. Wei Bai turned her head in the direction of the first elder. He was finally sure that there was someone there. She seemed to want to ask something, but she restrained herself and didn't say anything. After drinking a cup of tea, the paralyzed Wei Bai expressed that she couldn't live a good life anymore. There was no way to continue living like this. This damned strategy target was seriously ill. Her limbs were weak and her eyes were blinded. What else could she rely on to act? Do you have hair? Xiaya keenly sensed Wei Bai's abnormality. His eyes darkened as his fingertips gently caressed her fingers. It was both ambiguous and dangerous. Then he said softly, "This is my wife, Wei West." Wei Bai frowned. Her weak fingertips trembled in front of him, but she quickly lost her strength. She opened her mouth but found that she couldn't make a sound. Only Xiaya noticed her subtle resistance. His eyes were unusually gentle and deep. His fingers slowly pinched her fingertips as he whispered, "Her body isn't good, and her eyes are injured. Recently, she can't see the light and is very shy. She doesn't even dare to greet you." By Wei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 2554. Fuck. You're such a drama queen. She was so good at lying that she must be addicted to it. As a representative, the elder still raised a question. May I ask about Miss Wei's family? Xiaya slowly raised his eyes. Under his eyelashes was a pair of cold eyes, full of hostility. But his voice was unbelievably soft. It's just an ordinary civilian family. Because my life was in danger when I was digesting the holy dragon skeleton, I fell into the cemetery. If she hadn't saved me, I probably wouldn't have been able to come back. When the people of the Rose family heard that he was a civilian, everyone's expression was not good. After all, the Rose family had a long history and was an orthodox and noble bloodline. The bloodline was precious beyond words. In this precious bloodline flowed the magic of the holy great mage from 1,000 years ago. The purer the blood of the Rose family was, the more likely it was to give birth to a child with the talent of a great mage. Xiaya was the purest heir of the bloodline. He was also a great mage who was expected to send the Rose family to the peak of glory. Therefore, his next generation was especially important. Even the family had begun to select noble women with magic bloodline. But suddenly, Xiaya got married in private. And it was a civilian girl with no magic ability. Well, a good-looking girl. But she was his savior. Although everyone's expression changed, they still patiently did not object. More importantly, Xiaya digested the holy dragon skeleton. The power of the dragon, even the power of the imperial dragon. How important it was to the prosperity of a family. Everyone knew. The great elder discussed softly with the people next to him. Finally, everyone reached a consensus. In view of Grand Duke Xiaoya's great contribution to the family, we all agree that we can make an exception to accept a civilian woman into the Wester family. The elder stood up and said slowly. However, we still hope that Grand Duke Xiaoya will consider marrying a noble wife with magic bloodline. This was a compromise. Otherwise, Xiaoya's pure bloodline would be contaminated by the civilians. It would be a pity for the next generation. Wei Wei Bai was speechless when she heard these discussions. Are they talking about killing a pig? This pig is not fat enough. Can't we choose another one? No. That one was too skinny. He had to buy one more to eat. As Shea listened to the discussions and the compromises, his smile did not change. He didn't reply. Instead, he slowly moved closer to the girl's ear. His thin lips were red, and his breath was warm. Wei Wei, what do you think? Wei Wei Bai moved her lips and found that there was a slight tremor in her voice. She could talk now. The torment of the past few days had caused some damage to her vocal cords. His voice sounded a little hoarse and weak. But that didn't stop her from expressing her indifference and hatred. Let go of me. What does it have to do with me who you marry? I won't marry you, you lunatic. Her voice was too damaged. Her sweet and soft voice was hoarse due to the damage. Her scolding was gentle and seductive. Xiaoya's breathing became hotter, and his Adam's apple moved up and down. He suppressed his impulses. Then, with a hurt expression, she said, "But I like you the most. Are you going to give me to someone else?" Wei Wei Bai sneered, "Yes, I can't wait for you to die." Xiaoya gently played with her weak fingers, completely unaffected by her scolding. The smile on his face became more obvious. "If I die, I'll drag you down with me." Slash. Chapter 2555. These words were said carelessly, but also dangerously sweet. It was like the poisonous rose fragrance. Wei Wei Bai's face showed a trace of anger and helplessness. During this period of time, how to attack, abuse, and ridicule. This guy was always so stubborn. Even the stand-in bar was not moving. Not moving. This was the main point. It seemed that the verbal attack had reached its limit. She had to find another way to torment him. Anyway, the favorability would not drop. She did not want to think about how to attack him. She would torture him until the side mission was completed first. Disfigurement was a punishment. It was much more terrible than being struck by lightning, dancing with bare buttocks, or going around the world naked for an exhibition. What, you said that this had no integrity? Was integrity more important than one's face? No. Life was not as important as one's face. If you live in this world without a face, do you have the nerve to live? This little bitch, trash mission, ruining my face is ruining my life. Wei Wei Bai complained to the system for a while. The system said, "If you say so, then so be it." The host's face cancer made it so that she could never deviate from the main point. Shouldn't other people's main point be about imprisoning, raping, and destroying my dignity? Why was the host's main point face? And life points. Everything else was worthless. Xiaoya looked at the little witch who was so angry that she was biting her lips, but she did not say anything hurtful. He lowered his eyes and thought about it insincerely. Could it be that he scared her by saying that he would die with her? The young man narrowed his eyes and could not help but laugh. Then, he turned to look at the others. He found that everyone was shocked and looked at them with incredulous eyes. Then, someone with sharp eyes finally went to observe Wei Wei Bai. He found that her hands and feet were intact, and her body was emitting a strange and strong rose fragrance. The family had a tradition of making flower poison. There was a kind of paralyzing drug that was extracted from the magic nourishment of roses. There were no side effects, but once it was touched, anyone, including great mages, would not be able to move. Their muscles were also abnormally loose, and they could not use any strength. Plus the conversation between the two of them. The members of the Rose family were deeply silent. At first, he thought that she was a commoner girl who was forced into the Rose family with kindness. But in the end, it was a kidnapping of an innocent woman. All of them were people who had seen big scenes, so they remained silent for a while. The great elder shamelessly pretended not to hear anything. He repeated his question. Do you want to choose some noble ladies? Xiaya was originally looking at Wei Wei Bai with a grin. Hearing this, he finally turned his attention to the meeting. He smiled as he turned around to look at the great elder. His thin lips parted slightly, and the hostility in his eyes finally appeared. Scram! The elder shuddered. He felt as if the air around him had frozen. For a moment, even his breath was taken away. There was only a powerful magical aura that was using a terrifying method to extract his life force. Xiaya's delicate features were harmless and gorgeous. His smile was still there, but his cold and cruel aura made people shudder. I didn't ask you to come here to give me your opinions. If anyone dares to let another woman step in here, I'll chop them up and throw them into fertilizer. An exquisite and beautiful young man. Revealing his ferocious and cold side, everyone began to tremble. The elder finally sat down on the chair, not daring to say a word. His whole body was covered in cold sweat. Just now, he was almost killed by Xiaya silently. Xiaya sat up straight and calmly stretched out his hand. Give me the original list. Wei Wei and I are already married. The Imperial Organization has also been notified and stamped us. Chapter 2556. He swept away the laziness and indifference from before. His words were solemn. From now on, she will wear my surname, leave her family, and become a member of the Rose family. She will be protected by the family and also be protected by me. The beautiful young man's face was cold and murderous. Thus, anyone who disrespects her is disrespecting me, and also disrespecting the family. Whoever dares to challenge her authority is challenging me and the entire family. Does anyone have any objections? In this era, those who had the protection of the family. This was the best way to protect them. This was also the most honorable. Of course, Xiaya's ability could protect her and imprison her. But to make her completely unable to leave him, the power of the family was more important. Once recognized, then the nobles of the entire empire would be his eyes. She just had to step out of here. At every step, people would know her identity. She was the Grand Duchess of the Rose family. Of course, Xiaya thought of not giving her any status. Turning the castle into a canary's cage. This was even more impossible for her to escape than her identity as his wife. But he couldn't bear to. He glanced sideways and stared at the girl who was sitting weakly in the wheelchair and still struggling desperately. The greedy heat in his heart made him struggle to suppress it. This was also a restraint on him. He didn't dare to believe in his ability to control himself. Giving her the highest honor, giving her more protection. This was also to control himself and not to ask for endless things from her. These few days of madness without a bottom line. Not only did it scare her, but Xiaya also felt that his madness was extremely troublesome. He couldn't stop doing it to her. If he really took everything away from her and locked her up, then there would be no power to remind him, restrain him, and make him stop plundering her. Because she had no way to ask for help. Xiaya reached out and held his chin helplessly. It was all her fault. She was gentler. He wasn't that bad. The elders frowned and wanted to object. But Xiaoya's power and ability had grown to an unbelievable extent. Everyone knew that the elders of the Rose family still had power in the past. But Xiaoya's existence was too powerful. In fact, the family had already become his sole authority. The only one who could wrestle with him now was the old king. Even the old king was forced into a corner. He had no choice but to use all his strength to achieve a crazy counterattack. Previously, when Xiaya had disappeared, the Rose family had a hard time facing the king's counterattack. Even the Holy Sun had entered the church. There was nothing they could do. Until Xiaya came back, she had to live such a miserable life. Everyone now had a backbone. With the disappearance of the saint, the royal family did not even dare to fart. Only then did everyone realize that if there was no Xiaya, they would definitely be killed by the old king. Because the power of the Rose family had expanded to the point that if the royal family did not bow down to them, they would not be able to do anything. Then, he could only wait for death. Without Xiaya, they were just waiting to die. Of course, the purity of the bloodline was important. What was more important was the family's honor and life and death. Finally, the elders compromised. The oldest elder's fingers trembled as he handed over a thick and ancient booklet with a list of names. Write down your partner's name next to your name, and then let your wife press her fingerprint. In fact, it was the right thing to do. It was time to hold a family meeting. Then, prepare for a month in advance, and then hold a solemn name-adding ceremony. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 2557. Then, they would hold a large banquet. But Xiaya obviously didn't have the patience. He asked everyone to come. He just wanted to add their names in one go. Xiaya's fingers pinched the thick booklet that was made into a book. The cover of the booklet was shabby, but it was not damaged. Beautiful and gorgeous patterns with magical patterns swirling around them. Once her name was written, her life and death belonged to the Rose family. Xiaya stretched out his hand, and someone beside him respectfully handed him a quill dipped in ink. Wei Bai seemed to have noticed something and became a little anxious. Her struggle was too weak. Her voice was also very weak. You can't do this. I don't want to marry him. Aren't you nobles? You can't break the law unknowingly. Forcing others to marry. It was a crime. The naive and cute little witch was pitifully trying to persuade others. He's a bad person. I'm going to report him and put him in jail. Xiaya calmly and accurately turned to the page with his name. He lowered his eyes and carefully wrote down her name. The corners of his mouth curled up because of her naive words. Wei Bai was still trying to persuade others. I won't marry him. He's forcing me, a shameless person. When I expose his true colors, his reputation will be ruined. He won't even be able to keep his title of nobility. Everyone was deeply silent. But Xiaya was smiling happily. There was no trace of anger at all. He even thought that she was too cute and didn't intend to stop her at all. She seemed to feel that no one was talking. Her aggrieved threat was effective. She tried harder and said in a cold and disdainful tone. Don't you feel ashamed that such a scum appeared in your family? Forget about the shame, don't you feel ashamed? If you let me go, I won't report you. This threat was especially heavy. Xiaya had already written the name. He let go of the quill. Then, he took the red clay. The elders, family members, and all the nobles watched silently. The poor little girl didn't know at all. The nobles were the biggest robbers in this empire. What was shame? What was shame? Although it was a bit shameful for a Grand Duke to snatch a commoner girl for his marriage, it was still a bit shameful. It was better than losing his life. Therefore, everyone just watched. How did Xiaya coax a poor, innocent girl into becoming a duchess? Xiaya's voice softened. Wei Wei, I know you don't want to marry me. I can't do anything if you threaten me like this. Everyone, Xiaya sighed. If you report me, I won't be able to be a noble. Everyone, Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. As long as you let me go, I won't report you. Xiaya, can I ask how you are going to report me? Wei Wei Bai blushed and finally said, You forced me to get married. Xiaya smiled, but his voice was still fearful. What a heavy crime. Is there anything else? Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled and she wanted to say it several times. In the end, his face turned red. He really couldn't bring himself to speak of those shameless experiences. In the end, he just said, You're shameless and despicable. If you don't let me go, you'll lose your reputation. Xiaya sighed and shook his head. His fingers gently landed on her fingertips. When you exposed me, you should have been more ruthless. Otherwise, how could you have ruined my reputation? Wei Wei Bai's fingers were weak and she couldn't get rid of his entanglement. Slash. Chapter 2558. But she realized that something was wrong. Because her fingertips were pressed into the cool and moist ink paste. And the exquisite and beautiful young man approached her lazily and bewitchingly, his breath was hot and flirtatious. His fingertips touched her chin, his lips close to her, and he said softly, You should say something more ruthless, such as, just as he finished speaking. Her weak fingers had already fallen to the signature. Just like marriage. There was no chance to resist. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed, but her lips were already covered by a warm kiss. He even bit her maliciously. He walked away from her and said, For example, molesting you, forcing you, kissing you. Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale, and she shouted weakly and weakly, Don't say it, don't say it. Xiaya didn't tease her anymore. The young man with a gentle smile had a cold expression in the blink of an eye. He handed the list to the elder. Today, Wei Wei West will be a member of the Rose family. You guys send the order. The elder took the list. He knew that what was done was done. After all, Xiaya's existence ensured that the glory of the family would not be destroyed. That was the most important thing. As for the bloodline, maybe one day the Duke would think it through and ask for a noble woman. And this commoner girl. Ah. No one could say anything bad. This was obviously an unlucky person who was robbed. No matter how thick-skinned they were, they couldn't say that she was clinging to their family and seducing their Duke for glory and wealth. It was obvious that she saved the Duke. And the Duke repaid her kindness with ingratitude. When the girl innocently and pitifully condemned them just now. No matter how thick-skinned everyone was, they couldn't help but blush. It wasn't that they hadn't seen robberies before. But that was someone else. The Rose family was all good-looking, had a good family background, and awesome magic. It was all consensual. They had never seen anyone force someone to be a wife like this. Thinking about it this way, they felt that the impure bloodline didn't seem so bad. After all, the girl who was forced to be bitten by a poisonous snake was the one who was miserable. This comparison. Everyone felt much better. With the name list in hand, he respectfully took his leave. As for the struggling cries behind them, no one dared to respond. I'll just pretend that I didn't hear it. The heavy carved door was slammed shut. All the cries of sin and misery were shut away. Wei Wei Bai struggled so hard that the ribbon slipped from her eyes. He revealed a pair of terrified eyes. She blinked her eyes weakly, and a few strands of water vapor came out of her eyes because of the sudden light. Shea put a hand on the back of her hand and saw the tears in her eyes. He couldn't help but kiss her and lick the tears from the corner of her eyes. Wei Wei Bai was barely able to move. She immediately looked away and gave him a disgusted look. Shia paused, lowered his eyes, and suppressed the darkness in his eyes. He patiently said, "After being named, there will be a dance banquet. At that time, all the nobles will be invited, including princes and princesses. Everyone will be envious of you." There was actually a hint of flattery in his words. Wei Wei Bai's face paled, and there was no trace of joy in her pure eyes. Her voice was a little hoarse, and it was as cold as a knife. "When will you let go of me?" She clearly had no strength, but she still forced herself to raise her head and seriously repeated. "When will you let go of me?" Xiaoya's eyes darkened, and an ominous storm condensed in them. Everyone knew about the reputation of the Rose family. The little witch was even more clear about the identity she had obtained. Glory, wealth, honor, and the darling of God. Everything was incomparable. Was she not moved at all? He stared into her eyes. In his pure eyes, it was clear that he loved someone. When he hated someone to death, it was even more obvious that he couldn't deceive himself. Finally, the youth's thick eyelashes fell, and a trace of annoyance and helplessness appeared on his beautiful face. He held her hand tightly. Suddenly, he whispered in a pleading voice, "Am I so unlike him?" Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before saying, "You are completely different. The one I love is not you." The sidebar rose again. Shia smiled, but this time, his smile was exceptionally weak. "Not similar, I can change, Wei Wei." These words were too soft. As low as dust, even flowers can't bloom. Wei Wei Bai, she rushed to be a substitute for the first time. It was really an eye-opener. T. Chapter 2559. If this goes on, the side mission won't increase again. Because of the purpose of the side mission. It was to wake Shia up. There was no future in being a substitute, so he couldn't be a substitute. If he rushed to be a substitute, wouldn't it make it impossible for her to complete the mission? Wei Wei Bai was paralyzed on the chair, her face full of despair. The young man's soft kisses gently fell on her hair, little by little, like raindrops falling. The effect of the drug on her body was a little less, and she could move her fingers. Because it was annoying, looking at Xia Mosquito was even more annoying. She reached out and slapped his face weakly but firmly. "Go away." Xiaya was thick-skinned. She slapped him so weakly. It didn't affect him at all. But her resistance made him look down silently. The dark storm in his eyes finally turned into a sinister evil aura. His fingers hooked on the ribbon, clasped her wrist, and lovingly and ambiguously licked the inside of her wrist. Her smooth and tender skin was like pudding. Bai Weiwei wanted to break free, but found that the ribbon was already wrapped around her, section by section. "It doesn't matter if you don't like me. Anyway, you won't be able to see anyone in the future. You can only go out if you like me." Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. The feeling deepened as time passed. Xia Mosquito's blackening value was higher. Looking at the stand-in bar, it was only 60, but Xia Mosquito had already blackened to the point of being perverted. If the bar rose to 100, that blackness was unimaginable. After wrapping his hands around her weak hands, Xiaya looked up and looked around. Under the beautiful crystal candlesticks, on the long conference table, the decorative roses were in full bloom. He tugged at his cumbersome and gorgeous collar and smiled very cutely. "The environment here is good. During my coming-of-age ceremony, after the castle was built, I deliberately chose this place as the conference hall. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. Then she looked at her hand strangely. Finally, she looked at the pervert and snapped his fingers. Everything on the table disappeared. The long table, the gorgeous and clean surface. Only the broken rose petals on the table, scattered into an irregular carpet under the effect of magic. Xiaya smiled happily, picked up the bewildered girl, and put her on the table. Then he whispered in her ear, in a low whisper. "Do you like it here?" Wei Wei Bai's eyes widened as she finally realized something. But the young man on top of her was indifferent. "You probably don't like it, because you don't like anything about me." Because it was a substitute. Therefore, from the very beginning, all her love was for the right person. Substitutes were not loved. No matter how humble his love was, he would only receive her pity. This was something she could only get when she was in a good mood. But now, he couldn't even get a trace of pity from her. She was such a soft-hearted person, but she was so cruel to him. Xiaya felt that he was really going crazy. Because he had received that kind of affectionate and beautiful treatment. In that simple and dark little room. He felt the warmth of emotion that he had never felt before. However, he immediately took it back. It was too unfair. So what did she resent? He was the one who should be resentful. Once Viper obtained too much, he would take it all back one day. Viper would not be grateful for the good memories you gave him. He would only resent the person who took it back. Because Viper was such an ungrateful, greedy and terrible creature. Xiaya looked at the girl's panicked and helpless eyes. He stretched out his finger and gently covered her eyes. "When did you start to like me?" "Wei Wei. T. Chapter 2560. This sentence was obviously very humble. But he said as if he didn't care. There was also a slight resistance and a weak struggle. "You can go out whenever you like me." As if he was pitying her, the youth's low voice sounded suppressed. "So, hurry up and like me. Like your uncle." Wei Wei Bai held the most expensive and best cherry dessert in the capital this year and ate it expressionlessly. If she didn't eat more, her body would collapse sooner or later. Her fingers holding the spoon were trembling. People can't be too tired. If they were too tired, they would be like her. Her hands and feet would tremble, her brain would be slow, and she would have dementia and Parkinson's disease. A good man is more tired. He won't die of exhaustion. After Wei Wei Bai finished the dessert, the maid lowered her head and left without saying a word. The second maid immediately came over and held a porcelain cup decorated with flowers. Inside was warm sweet tea and several plates of exquisite biscuits. There was a huge living room and a huge stained glass window. It was snowing heavily outside. The blood-red roses were climbing outside the glass window, looking exceptionally beautiful. The living room was as warm as spring. A dozen maids lined up to serve their master. The flames in the fireplace were magic flames. It ensured that there was no cold air in the entire castle. A beautiful long-haired cat lay obediently at Wei Wei Bai's feet, meowing pleasingly. The carpet was made of the most expensive animal fur. There were gorgeous decorations made of money everywhere. The candlesticks and lamps were made of gold. Money corrodes people's hearts. Wei Wei Bai sighed. If she hadn't seen such a big scene, it would have been corroded by Xiaoya's move. This was the standard of living of the top nobles. Even in the capital, there weren't many who could be as luxurious as Xiaoya. Wei Wei Bai said that she wasn't the kind of person who would be corroded by this thing, so she drank the sweet tea expressionlessly. It was good to have more sugar. She had lost a few kilograms of weight. If she continued to lose weight, she would become a skeleton. She wouldn't have to care about the punishment of the side quest and would be disfigured automatically. Wei Wei Bai drank her tea and looked at the heavy snow outside the window. Her witch mark was still there. However, she was restrained by an unusually domineering power, and no magic detection could reveal her identity. Now, there was no chance for him to jump around. Just verbal attacks were no longer enough to make the substitute advance horizontally. Moreover, if the verbal attack was too much, Xiaya wouldn't do anything. He would only do that thing. Now, he was enjoying himself. He was just waiting for her to retaliate. He could use this as a pretext to make a fuss. Wei Wei Bai refused to be tricked and could only think of other ways to provoke him. The only way to provoke him now was to cheat on him and be cuckolded. But she was surrounded by maids. As long as it was a man, even the housekeeper would not show up. Even if he did show up occasionally, he would be at least 3 meters away from her, and the time between them would not exceed 3 seconds. Actually, a maid would do as well. However, Wei Wei Bai glanced at the maids with hidden bitterness. All of them were over 40 years old. She was more like a nanny than a maid. Moreover, they were mute nannies. All of them had undergone the most professional training and would definitely not open their mouths. No matter how much she talked to herself, it was useless. She couldn't get out, and she couldn't be cuckolded. Wei Wei Bai sighed expressionlessly. These days, imprisonment was as old-fashioned as Xiaya. She hadn't seen many of them. Other than that, there was only that. Couldn't there be something new in imprisonment? Even the imprisonment plots in novels were starting to be innovative. What imprisonment to do homework? Imprisonment to do exam questions. Imprisonment to memorize pi. This sounded even worse than the old-fashioned imprisonment plot. Why was it? To facilitate your next reading, you can click on .you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.